Welcome to the January 25th regular meeting of the City of Troy Planning Commission. Copies of the agenda for tonight's meeting are available at the entrance to the room. Agendas and minutes of prior meetings are available on the city website. The meeting will be conducted in accordance with the agenda as presented or amended by the Planning Commission.
State law establishes planning commissions. This planning commission is comprised of 9 residents appointed to serve our community. Members are appointed by the mayor and confirmed by city council. Other individuals participating in the meeting include representative of the city's planning department, city's attorney's office, and the city's planning consultant, Carlisle Wortman Associates.
If you wish to address the Planning Commission, please come forward to the lectern when recognized and clearly print your name and address on the sign-in sheet. Please begin your remarks by stating your name for the benefit of the commissioners. All remarks are to be addressed to the Planning Commission, not to anyone else in the room. If you have a cell phone or any other device that might disrupt the meeting, please either silence it or turn it off. At this time, I ask the Planning Commission Recording Secretary, Kathy Zarnicki, to conduct the roll call.
Mr. Faison.
Here.
Mr. Hudson.
Here.
Mr. Krent.
Here.
Mr. Lambert.
Here.
Ms. Malala Holly.
Here.
Ms. Parakis.
Here.
Mr. Rahman.
Here.
Mr. Tagle.
Here.
Quorum present, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mrs. Zarnicki. Next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda or any amendments? Mr. Faison?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
Okay, is there a second? Mr. Tagle seconds it. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, call the roll call, please.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Malala Holly.
Yes.
Ms. Parakis.
Yes.
Mr. Rahman.
Yes.
Mr. Tagle.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. Next up is approval of the minutes from the January 11th meeting, and I know Ms. Parakis may have some potential amendments to that, so.
Yes, I did. I noticed in the minutes there was a reference to parking bumps when it was supposed to be speed bumps. So I'm wondering, I don't know if that's permitted to, I think it's just a clerical administrative change. I'm not sure how that works, but I would propose that we fix that. And then the other item was I felt that in number 5, of the resolution, we need to, it said that the plan will provide ultimately for signage at the store in the form of a monument sign. And then I think we need to insert the word "and" at the east end of the property in the form of a street sign, because I think otherwise it wasn't clear to what we were trying to accomplish. I think they're both clerical, and I don't know if we're allowed to make those changes, but I'm pointing them out.
Any concerns or a motion, Mr. Tagle?
I guess I have a question. I've had some experience with this property, and a monument sign, there's a limitation of how much signage you can put on a property, and I don't know if a monument sign would actually push that beyond the limit of what's approvable for the amount of frontage that center has. Again, I wasn't in the meeting, but talking to the petitioner, I know that he was talking about directional signage more than a monument signage. So I don't know if that muddies the water or that clears anything up.
Anyone from staff had any observations?
I'll address, it's Ms. Parakis and I did speak earlier today about this issue. It's not really a clerical error, and it's a resolution, and no one corrected Mr. Rauch when he made the motion for the resolution. There's a big difference between a parking bumper and a speed bump. My concern is if we're just going to change a resolution and the applicant isn't here, I don't think it fundamentally changes anything, and I think everyone was on the same page, but I don't want to make that assumption. I suppose if this body wants to have a discussion and make a resolution saying that you're all in agreement that Mr. Rauch meant speed bump, you all thought we were talking about speed bumps, and then past that, Brent then can communicate to the applicant and let them know that change was made, and if they have an issue at that point, then they can come back. That's really the only way that I can see that, because it's not just an amendment to the minutes. It's Planning Commission, as I like to say, speaks through its resolutions. So I'm really uncomfortable just making a typographical change to a resolution when it's really more than a typographical change.
Mr. Savina?
The intent of the resolution, as I understand it, was one of the points was to send it back to OHM for another once-over. So once the draft minutes were provided to me by Kathy, I forwarded those minutes to the city engineer and the city's traffic consultant at OHM, who happens to be in the audience tonight. So he's got them. He understands that what the Planning Commission seeks is a once-over. Look at it again to ensure that signage, speed bumps, et cetera, are reconsidered. So I think the intent of the resolution is very clear. The verbiage, I don't have as much heartburn with, because he's looking at it again at everything as per the direction of the Planning Commission. Does that make sense?
Ms. Parakis?
I'm not really sure what we're going to do now. Should we address Mr. Tagle's comment about the sign, though, or were you saying that that's taken care of because the intent is they're going to put the sign that's appropriate there?
They're going to look at every element of the site plan, including signage, and come back with a recommendation.
Okay.
It's up to the commission how they'd like to act on the minutes. Ms. Parakis, are you satisfied with just moving the approval of the minutes as written with that understanding from clarification from Mr. Savinet and Ms. Dufresne?
Yeah, but my understanding, the resolution wasn't requiring them to come back to the Planning Commission, though.
No,
It was
I
not?
don't believe so.
Okay. So if they understand the intent, I'm fine with leaving the mistakes in the minutes.
All right. Mr. Hudson?
I'd like to maybe make a comment on that. There's a real difference between intent and what the resolution says. And I'm a little bothered by the fact that, well, that was the intent, we can overlook the resolution. I think it's got to be amended some way to reflect what was said. And if it was the intent to do something else, substitute the word for it.
I tend to agree with Mr. Hudson. I think that's what I was trying to say. I'm not trying to contradict what Mr. Savinet said, but I do think that you need to have some sort of discussion clarifying what the resolution should have said. And I'm talking about speed bumps. I'm not sure about the monument sign. I think that's a separate issue. And as long as, just make sure that this board's on the same page with each other about what the resolutions say, and that gets communicated to the applicant, so the applicant doesn't think that we changed something. This is a minor thing, but it speaks to, what if it were a bigger issue down the road? Transparency is very key to city council, and I want to make sure this board is being as transparent as possible as well. So I would like to see you have a discussion, clarify what you think the resolution should have said, so that the minutes and the resolution going forward are clear.
Any other members of the commission have something they'd like to state on the minutes? Yes, Mr. Faison.
I'm sorry, nothing on the minutes, but just the concept of the consultant looking at the plan and coming back. So when they come back, that will be an administrative process? Any comments they have?
Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Somebody like to make a resolution here?
Sorry, Mr.
Okay.
Tagle is reminding me that, sorry. Mr. Tagle is reminding me that he recused himself from this item.
So he probably should.
So he probably should not partake in the discussion. I'm not gonna ask him to leave the room for this particular instance, but I'm gonna ask Mr. Tagle not to vote, at least on this part of, clarifying the resolution.
Okay.
Thank you for reminding me, Mr. Tagle.
Thank you, Mr. Tagle, for bringing that to our attention. Any motion on the minutes?
I, for one, would definitely like to have the correct wording be represented in our resolution so that we stand clear in our understanding and communication to the developer, to the project.
Any other comments from the commission?
Just for understanding purpose, because there is a third party involved, so you have to talk to them and then bring it back after talking to them. In other cases, we normally go and check it, and in the next meeting, we normally approve it, right? So that's not the case in this case, I think, right?
No, because we didn't ask the applicant, we didn't ask that they come back again. So
Right.
we're making a motion, I think what we're doing is we're making a motion to modify the minutes, including the resolution, and really, we're just in item number 2 and item number 6, we're going to substitute the word speed bumps for parking bumper, and then I don't know what this body wants to do about the monument sign.
Well, being that I used to be in the sign fabrication business, monument signs are a specific design, but the city code only allows for monument signs to be placed in certain areas and so many square feet, depending on how many square footage of storefront. So that can be resolved administratively, as far as I'm concerned, because if they applied for a monument sign on the property and it didn't meet code, then it would be denied. So as far as the sign, I'd say the owner of the property could go ahead and present his sign proposal to the city, and if it's approved, it gets approved. If it's denied, it's denied. So I would leave that one out of any corrections. I think that's what it says right now is fine to me. I think the changing the parking bumpers, because we talked about parking bumpers along the west side of the property, and we talked about speed bumps through the long loop around the back. They're two different issues, and somehow they got mixed up together. So I think that should be clarified. So I guess I'd like to make a resolution. We make the change in item number 6 and item number 2 from parking bumper, and the other one is parking bumpers, plural, to speed bump and speed bumps.
Before we take a second, Ms. Parakis, go ahead.
So my point for number 5, I didn't bring up the issue about the monument sign. That was Mr. Tagle. My point was that I don't think it reads clearly. As it currently reads, it says that the plan will provide ultimately for signage at the store in the form of a monument sign at the east end of the property in the form of a street sign that designates clearly direction to the drive-through. I think it should read that the plan will provide ultimately for signage at the store in the form of a monument sign and at the east end of the property in the form of a street-type sign. The way it's currently written, to me, it's very unclear what we're even talking about. I think we're talking about 2 different signs.
Correct.
So the monument sign issue is a separate issue which can be taken care of administratively. Mine's more of a clerical issue, I think, inserting the word "and" so we know that we're talking about 2 signs.
I agree with that, because right now, like you say, as it says, form of a monument sign at the east end. No, it's going to be at the west end. So, yeah,
So Mr. Kren, is that your motion then to?
Yeah, we got to amend that too. We got to put, like Ms. Parakis said, we should really amend it to say in the form of monument sign at the west end of the property and at a form of a street type sign at the east end of the property that clearly designates direction to the drive-through.
Okay. So it sounds like we're amending those minutes, number 1, to change parking bumpers to speed bumps, and we're going to be adding an "and" in there between the 2 signs so that we know it's 2 different signs.
Basically, yes.
Okay, is that your motion then, Mr. Kren?
Yes, it is.
And Ms. Parakis, why don't you be the seconder on
I'll
that?
second that.
Okay. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, and Ms. Zarnicki, don't call on Mr. Tagle, so.
Mr. Krent.
Yes.
Mr. Lambert.
Yes.
Ms. Malali Holly.
Yes.
Ms. Parakis.
Yes.
Mr. Rahman.
Yes.
Mr. Faison.
Yes.
Mr. Hudson.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. My first meeting as chair, and we have a big discussion about the minutes, so hopefully things will get better as we go along. So, next on the agenda is public comment for items not on the agenda. Is there anyone here in the audience that would like to speak on items not on the agenda? Mr. Roush, we know who you are, but you go ahead and announce who you are and sign in, please.
Certainly. My name is Jerry Rauch, and I'll sign in when I'm done to save time. I wanted to talk about meeting notices and agenda packets. At the December meeting, the resident raised concerns of inadequate or misleading sign and notices. And I had pointed out at that meeting that the meeting packet and notices coming out on the Friday before a meeting were really inadequate for several reasons. The first of which is the planning commissioners don't always have sufficient time to review the material. And the second one is neighbors are not aware of developments occurring next door unless they check a city webpage. And yet the developers must have knowledge of the meeting in advance of the Friday before. Clearly, the system is a disservice to you and the residents. It would take little effort to change this to provide the minutes on the prior Friday, 11 days in advance. I believe Mr. Kyle and Mr. Savinet meet on Tuesdays before distributing the packets on Friday. There's no need to have him catch up the 11 days. Just push back the matters that would be on the next agenda to the following meeting. It would be a one-time change, delaying the applicants to the next meeting with no burden on staff or Mr. Carlisle. Residents don't receive written notice on all matters and shouldn't have to check the website to find out what's going on. At least give them a chance to find out before coming to you and being fully prepared. And give yourselves an opportunity to be fully prepared. If you were to actually look at the 184 pages that were in your meeting packet tonight, visit the site, review the relevant sections of the zoning ordinance, how much time did you have to spend to prepare? And is that few days sufficient? So I ask that you please put the matter on the agenda and discuss it and make a change.
Thank you. Anyone else in the audience that would like to speak on an item not on the agenda tonight? Seeing none, then we will go on to the preliminary site plan review for the proposed Westing 2 south of Waddles, east of Crooks, 870 Bear Lane Drive, PIN 88-20-21-101-009, Section 21, currently zoned NN Neighborhood Node I District. Mr. Carlisle, I think you'll be doing the presentation.
Yes, thank you, and good evening. Mr. Chairman, if it's okay with you and the rest of the Planning Commission, I would like to request you something a little unusual. It's difficult, if not impossible, to separate these two projects because they have so many interconnections, both physically as well as within an application. Issues of open space and tree mitigation and traffic and circulation. Really, it's hard to talk about one without the other. While the Planning Commission would take separate motions on these two applications separately, I think it would be worthwhile if we, as a group, discuss them, or at least I presented them as a complete package. So if that's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, I would recommend that we proceed with that.
Any objections from members of the Planning Commission? Seeing none, go ahead.
Does the applicant know you're going to do that?
I don't know. Okay. So just for context, the area that we're talking about with regards to these two projects is located at the intersection of Crooks and Waddles. There's two projects tonight that are being discussed. The first is Phase 2 of Westington. It's the parcel outlined in red. As the name alludes to it, it is the second phase of the previously approved Phase 1 of the Westington project. Phase 1 is currently under construction. Phase 2 is approximately 1.2 acres in area. The second project under discussion tonight is directly adjacent to Crooks. It's the Hills West project, and it's approximately 1.33 acres in area. This is the site context of the two developments. You'll notice it's flipped a little bit, so north is actually pointing this way. Phase 1 of Westington includes this project outlined kind of in the light gray. It includes 4 buildings. Phase 2 of Westington is kind of in the back end of Phase 1. It includes these 2 buildings and has shared parking and shared circulation. The second project is Hills West, which is the project that directly adjacent to Crooks. It also includes 2 buildings. These 2 projects, each of them are 30 units each, so a total of 60 additional units located in 4 separate buildings of 15 units each. Access with regards to the project includes a access off of Waddles, an access off of Crooks, a access through the 7-Eleven site, which is located in this location, as well as a cross-access between the Hills West project as well as the Wessington Phase 2. It's my understanding, as well as in discussions with the applicant and a requirement based on some of the other zoning matters I'll raise, that Wessington Phase 2 is combined with Wessington Phase 1 to essentially be one project from a zoning perspective. With regards to Wessington Phase 2, again, that site kind of in the corner adjacent to Wessington Phase 1, we do note with regards to natural features, there is an existing 100-year floodplain that runs kind of in the corner. It would be this corner of the site. It's a similar issue that was contemplated and discussed as part of Wessington Phase 2. The applicant proposes to continue an improved retaining wall that runs from Phase 1 into Phase 2 to deal with that issue. Floodplain confirmation would be determined as part of final engineering, which we do for all projects in the city. With regards to Woodlands, it appears, it was a little unclear that they're removing all the trees on the site. The replacement numbers have varied based on the applicant's submittal. I think I reviewed three different site plans for this over the course of the last couple of months, and the numbers have slightly varied. At the highest count, I calculated a total of 486 inches of replacement is required. Furthermore, in discussion of the tree preservation issue, there's a number of clumping of trees, particularly located in where I've kind of outlined in red, that are significant woodland trees of some significance. We do note that we're asking the applicant to consider if they can either shift buildings around, reduce the size, et cetera, to preserve more of those trees. In consultation with that recommendation, we're also asking that they do confirm the location and the number of tree replacement to ensure that they do comply with the ordinance. Looking at the issues with regards to Woodlands at Hills West, we know this is not in the floodplain, it doesn't have any wetlands, but it does have some trees on site. Again, they're removing all trees on the site, and the applicant notes that they're required to replace 230 inches with 115 inches of replacement. We do note that there, again, similar to the other project, there is an opportunity to save additional trees. We notice that there's a significant amount of trees along Berry Lane Street or Berry Lane Road, located kind of in the southern end of the site. Again, we're asking the applicant if they're able to shift the property around or reduce part of the building in order to preserve additional trees. With regards to open space, it appears from the application that they're planning on using the open space in totality by combining all the phases, Phase 1, Phase 2, and the Hills West to meet those open space requirements. The amount of open space is unclear from the application, as well as landscape space. So what we're asking the applicant to confirm is the amount of open space provided for each individual Phase 1, Phase 2, and Hills West, as well as the total in combination. Their indication from us, based on the total, is that they're approximately 20.99% of open space and landscaping, which in totality would meet that open space requirement. But again, we're asking them to provide the calculations for each of those different components. One of the questions that came up during our review was the issue of height. The Planning Commission members, we have passed a ordinance requirement that notes that developments adjacent to single-family residential have a maximum height of 30 feet or 2.5 stories. As part of a review, we did ask the applicant to confirm that they met the story requirement of 2.5. The city's building official did look at the plans that they submitted, as well as additional calculations, and confirmed they do meet that 2.5 story requirement in the plans from the architect, as well as the building official's responses in your packet for additional information. Similar to open space and landscaping, there's some combinations of the site to meet ordinance requirements. Wessington Phase 2 requires 60 spaces. Based on what was shown, they're deficient in parking for just Phase 2. However, when you combine that with Phase 1, they do meet the required spaces, and they are including 4 additional guest spaces with Phase 1 and Phase 2 as part of Wessington. If you look at the Hills West project, again, they required 60 spaces. They're providing 74 spaces. So in total, if you combine the two sites, they are providing approximately 16 or 18 guest parking spaces. What's not been clear to us is if there's going to be a shared parking agreement between the Hills West and the Phase 1 and Phase 2 and how that may work. We also asked that the Planning Commission do discuss whether or not guest parking is sufficient or if additional parking needed to be provided. We asked the applicant to provide a traffic study, understanding that traffic would be a significant issue of discussion with the Planning Commission. As part of the traffic study, in consultation with the engineering department, the applicant did a traffic study of all 3 of these developments, Phase 1, Phase 2, in the Hills West. In totality, the applicant's traffic study determined that an average daily traffic count would be a little over 1,000 cars a day. If you break that down to the peak hours, it would be approximately 73 total trips in the morning and 90 trips in the evening, so approximately one car per hour. I'm sorry, 1 car per minute in the peak morning and about a car and a half a minute in the afternoon peak. The applicant's conclusion of their traffic study notes that the results of the study indicate that the addition of site-generated traffic, the study intersection approaches and delays will continue to operate in a manner similar to existing conditions with minor additional delays. Therefore, no mitigation measures are recommended to accommodate the traffic volume. The review was done by the city's traffic consultant, OHM, who they conclude that they've reviewed the traffic study, and they propose residential development located at this corner of Crooks and Wattles Road. The applicant has proposed 162 units, and they do, I think I cut off a sentence here, they do agree with the findings of the applicant's traffic study. I want to note that both the applicant's engineer as well as the city's traffic consultant are here to answer any questions you have with regards to traffic. This is the elevation. This elevation is one of the side elevations, and it will be more visible in one project than the other. This is the side elevation that fronts on Crooks and would be visible. The 2 elevations, the elevations for all the projects are the same. They're the same elevations for all 4 buildings. There are a number of review standards that the Planning Commission is asked to consider. These are both set forth in the design standards in Section 5, as well as the site plan review sections in Section 8. Specifically, with regards to the site plan, does the development ensure compatibility to existing commercial districts and provide a transition between land uses? Does the development incorporate best architectural practices in building design? And lastly, does the project enhance the character, environment, and safety for pedestrians and motorists? Mr. Chairman, we ask that the Planning Commission hold discussion with regards to the application and talk about these matters. First, can the applicant shift the building or reduce the size to preserve additional trees? Confirm tree mitigation requirements, confirm open space landscaping calculations, discuss the need for additional guest parking, and have a discussion with regards to compliance with design standards and site plan review standards. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Carlisle. Before I open it up for questions from commissioners to Mr. Carlisle, just encourage you to focus the questions on those matters where he has some ability to answer, and those, obviously, some of the others will tend to be more to the applicant. So any questions from members of the commission for Mr. Carlisle? Yes, Mr. Faison.
So I had a question on the last bullet you put up on the last slide of your presentation. Compliance with site plan review standards. I wasn't sure what you meant by that.
So, in the zoning ordinance, in the site plan review section, we have these 3 standards. Development shall ensure compatibility, development shall incorporate recognized best practices, and enhance the character and safety. These are important discussions that standards the Planning Commission should consider when they review this project. So, our recommendation is that these should be considered and have some discussion with the Planning Commission with regards to do they comply with these standards or not.
Okay, so nothing different than any other site plan review?
Nope. These are the same 3 standards that we look at for any site plan.
I ask because I typically didn't see that called out specifically. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Parakis.
Yes. I was not at the December 8th meeting that approved the Phase 1, but I was at the October 27th, 2020 meeting where Phase 1 was first introduced. And at that time, we had discussed all sorts of things, including moving the access into the parking lot to the east to get it away from the Crooks-Wattles intersection and away from the 7-Eleven entrance, because there was much concern by the planning commissioners as well as from residents that the traffic was too heavy there. I do note there was also discussion about the massing of the buildings. There was discussion about the requirement of an EVA. I did pull the meeting minutes from December 8th where it was approved, and they took care of it. They changed the massing. They moved the entrance to the east, but it was left where they still had not satisfied the EVA requirement. And so it was conditioned upon address the fire department requirements with regards to proposed EVA prior to the final site approval. So tonight, well, a few days ago, when the agenda packet came out, I see that the EVA with Berry Lane, which was the only EVA that was discussed at the October meeting and the December meeting, they were not able to get that, but instead, they're using the 7-Eleven. Under Article 13, Site Design Standards, which is what we're talking about, the intent of this article is to promote the public health, safety, and welfare. If you look at Section 13.09, it talks about access management. And in Section C, it specifically talks about the number of access points shall be limited to the minimum needed to provide reasonable access. Access points shall be designed and located to minimize conflicts with traffic operations along the street and be placed as far from intersections as practical, but no closer than 125 feet, and it goes on. So I was a little bit surprised that the 7-Eleven was opened and being used for the 102 apartments that are currently going up. I feel that it falls under the purview of the planning department, given that it is a site design standard to talk about the access points onto the roads. So I'm not sure how that happened, that now 7-Eleven is an access point. And now we're talking about it for 60 more apartments. Can you explain how it happened? Because like I said, I missed that December meeting, but it didn't seem to have happened at that December meeting.
You want to do this? I'll do it. So there's EVA, just so everyone's on the same page, EVA stands for Emergency Vehicle Access. And the intent of an EVA is to provide very limited access just to be used in the event of an emergency. So what the typical, there's a standard design that we have that involves designing it for the weight and the width and the turning radius of emergency vehicles, but limiting access by having breakaway wooden bollards. So so it functions like a pedestrian connection, but in the event of an emergency, when emergency vehicles need access, they have holes drilled at the bottom, so they're breakaway. So police cars, ambulances, fire trucks can break through those. Most EVAs will not be used in any of our lifetimes. They're for the rare occasion when all other access is blocked and they have to break through those in the event of emergency. So to my knowledge, we've got a number of EVAs in the city. I'm not aware of any of them ever having been used. So my point is they're rarely used. So I'm going off a little bit of memory here. I believe that the Westington Phase 2 was approved with a condition that, well, you read
Phase 1, right?
Phase 1,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
Phase 1. I think you read the condition, and it talked about providing an EVA to the satisfaction of the fire department.
Yep.
I was looking at Westington 1 before the meeting to prepare for the meeting, and there was, during the final review for Westington 1, Phase 1, the fire department, during the review of the plans, expressed concern with the EVA on Berry Lane. They pushed and did not want that connection. They instead recommended a connection to 7-Eleven. Now remember, 7-Eleven, which was constructed about 10 years, 8, 9, 10 years ago, I don't know the exact date, it was constructed with cross-access, constructed to the property line on the 7-Eleven side. So it was there on the 7-Eleven side, reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission, with the intent that it would be connected to the east in the future when this was developed. So when the fire department suggested that they didn't support the Berry Lane EVA for a number of reasons, including the design of the road and the carrying capacity of the road, and I think there was also some dialogue that I was somewhat privy to, but not really. There were some legal concerns related to the fact that Berry Lane is a private drive, not a private road. It's not a public road. And there's a resident who lives at the eastern end of Berry Lane who I think has had some objections to it being used for EVA purposes, et cetera. So I think given the fact that from a fire safety standpoint, the fire department pushed for that elimination. Engineering supported it. I certainly wasn't going to, it's a team, it's a dialogue, internal dialogue of all departments, so everyone gets input. It seemed to make sense to utilize the existing EVA that was intended to be connected to 7-Eleven and between 7-Eleven and this development in the first place. So it made sense from a fire standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, and therefore from a planning standpoint.
Okay. When we had the discussion at the October 27th meeting and then again at the December 8th meeting, how was it that there was never any conversation about 7-Eleven opening up into the, into the Westington? It was never a conversation. Had it been a conversation, that would have been a deal breaker for me and I think for some of the other planning commissioners, because we were already very concerned about we were complaining about the traffic coming out of the 7-Eleven onto Crooks. So if that was an option on the table, how was it not brought forward? And when we were looking for an EVA, it seemed so obvious. I mean, I'm going to be the first to admit, I was very naive to not question it. The fact that it wasn't brought up led me to believe that it wasn't an option. So, it's one thing for you to say that 7-Eleven is going to be used as an EVA, but I know it's not. It's a cross, what are they calling it? A cross access, which is going to be open to 102 apartments that are going up, and those 102 cars now, with very close proximity to the Wattles Crook exit, anyone who wants to head south now is going to be coming out of there, which was not contemplated by the Planning Commission when it was presented to us. And I do believe that it falls under our purview because it is a site design standard, and it really should have been brought to the Planning Commission to make the decision on that. I understand what you're saying, that it goes to the fire department, but my understanding of what happened was Bear Lane didn't work out, I get it, I understand the reasons. So they needed to find a solution, and now they don't need an EVA because they have a cross-access. But that should have been presented to us when we were approving whether or not this was the appropriate thing for this intersection.
I don't recall if the EVA, the cross-access that's shown on this site plan that's on the screen lines up perfectly with the cross-access that's on 7-Eleven. I'd have to pull up an old site plan and verify that, or perhaps their civil engineer could verify that. I'm going off of memory. But again, the intent of the cross-access on the 7-Eleven side was to connect with this property in the future. That's why it was proposed in the first place when 7-Eleven was developed.
So why wasn't it part of the presentation by the planning department so we would be aware of that?
Well, I think at the time the intent was that there be a connection on Berry Lane, that there be an EVA provided, on Berry Lane.
At the time, but you also said that when 7-Eleven built it 10 years ago, the intent was to connect with whatever was going to be to the east of them.
Well,
so regardless of Berry Lane, why did the planning department not inform us that that was on the table and going to happen?
I'd have to look back at the design. I'd have to research your question and get back to you. I'd have to look at what was proposed, what was discussed, the location of the cross access. I can't answer your question right now.
Meaning you're trying to say that the position of the building, you're not sure if like when it was presented in December that it actually had a connection, like a road, in other words, to that 7-Eleven cross access? That's what you have to get back to me on?
I'm going to have to research timing, what was proposed, what was discussed. I just can't answer your question right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Krent.
My question is regarding the trees. Who did the tree survey? Was it the applicant or is that city?
No, the applicant's always required to provide a tree survey.
Okay. So, and whoever they hired determine the condition of those trees, obviously, because it's in the report. My question is, this is referring to Westington Phase 2, there's 192 trees. The survey shows only 5 trees are in good condition. Holy cow, we had that many rotten trees? It's just kind of hard to believe, to me. You know what I'm saying? I would like some oversight on the condition, because we're talking about leveling them all, and, for them to just say 5 are good and the rest are below that, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I haven't gone on the property to look to see, and I'm not a tree expert, so I really can't grade trees, especially in the wintertime when there's no leaves. But I would have someone in the city have a second review of the condition of those trees, because the ratio is just, to me, basically it says to me all that whole area of trees should all be leveled, because none of them practically are any good. And
Well, I think that's part of the confusion, Mr. Kremp, because we have some allowances to remove tree requirements based on the quality and the condition of the trees, but their mitigation table and requirements indicate that they had replaced 300 up 300 and varied up to 400. So if they found that only 5 were in good condition, they wouldn't have equated that to 300 or 400 trees of replacement. So that's where there's a little bit of confusion on terms of what was required.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? Mr. Sadik?
I just want to double check. This neighborhood node is type B type neighborhood node, right, Mr. Carlisle?
I'm sorry?
Type B, neighborhood node type A.
It's I, isn't it?
In terms of site type or in terms of the node?
Node type?
It's site type, I have to confirm, I think it's site type A. Neighborhood node I is neighborhood node.
So it's B.
It's B.
It's a type B.
Okay, I'll have to confirm. I can confirm that.
Yeah, I checked it on the ordinance. So my question is, what is the difference between neighborhood node A and B? Can you please explain to us so that we can kind of have some idea? I have some idea, but it's not clear. It's pretty detailed. I know the difference. My feeling like it's a buffers, less intense, and so on.
So
if you could just give a good...
This goes back many, many years when the master plan was first contemplated. So when the master plan was contemplated, we looked at the city and the planning department, planning commission looked at the major mile intersections, and they established 21 of these neighborhood nodes through the master plan. And in that, they identified unique conditions for each of these nodes. So based on the master plan finding of unique conditions, we then zoned these nodes into the zoning ordinance. And to distinguish between different intersections and different nodes, we reclassified them as site type A and site type B, as well as street types, A, B, and C, I believe it is. General rule of thumb is a site type A are typically at the corners and allow for more intense development, both in height, uses, et cetera, and building forms. Site type Bs are typically at the peripheral, adjacent to, a lot of times they provide the transition and the buffer between the properties at the hard corner and those of the residential or other uses behind it. Typically, Bs, as a general rule of thumb, allow less intense development than site types As. So the difference between site type A and site type B is location, characteristic, and again, general rule of thumb, more development is allowed on A, less development is allowed on B. Does that clarify your question?
Yeah, no, definitely. That's my understanding also. So interestingly, this node I, if you look at all 4 corners, they are type B. And there was a reason for that we wanted to have this less intense. That's probably I can infer from this discussion, right?
Well, yes, but there also is what's permitted under the zoning. So again, if it was site type A, we would allow for more intense development here than what the zoning ordinance allows under site type B.
Because there are some other things that kind of mentioned on site type B where, in neighborhood node B where it's less intense, it's kind of transitional, as you said, so, and then it's more varieties of amenities and so on. So I just want to verify that, that this is something that is probably not the way I'm seeing it, the way it's proposed, more intense. But I just wanted to double check that. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other commissioners with questions? Let me see if anybody else first, and then I'll get back to you. Any other commissioners with questions? Okay, Ms. Parakis.
I wanted to, because Mr. Kremp brought up the tree issue, I'm going to bring it up now. Also in Article 13, we have an article in the zoning ordinance called woodland protection. The purpose and intent is to help prevent unregulated and in many cases unnecessary removal of trees and related natural resources. So what I found interesting was the section E, which talks about tree replacement. Number 1 says, when, as part of a site plan or subdivision approval, the Troy Planning Commission authorizes the removal of landmark trees and trees within a woodland, the removal shall be mitigated as follows. And then it proceeds to give the mitigation requirements. So it's premised on the Planning Commission authorizing the removal of the landmark trees. In the following sections, it defines tree protection. It says protected trees shall be preserved to the greatest extent practicable through the use of site development techniques, including but not limited to the following. In general, landmark trees should not be removed for development. So when we get our packets and we get the charts and has the charts of the tree removals and the mitigation, it sort of assumes that Planning Commission is authorizing the removal in the first place. So I'd like to ask my fellow planning commissioners that we focus more on starting out with preserving the trees and not jumping the gun and talking about how we're going to mitigate the tree removal, because I think many Troy residents are tired of developers going and clearing off the properties and not making a fair attempt. So when we are putting it up there and saying, can we see if the developer can move the buildings so we don't chop down trees, the answer, of course, is yes, 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 of course they can do that. We can require, require them to to move the buildings and to save the trees. So I think that we need to make sure that we're doing the best job that we can to enforce the zoning ordinance, which does have a provision to protect the trees.
Any more questions for Mr. Carlisle? Yes, Mr. Rahman.
I'm sorry, I forgot. The other question that Mr. Carlisle I have is about recently we passed that ordinance that the height requirement for neighborhood node, and that kind of limited this proposal to within 30 feet height, right? Now, I see that there's 3 stories, and one is at attic and another one is in the basement, right? Is that the way it's being proposed?
It's 2.5 stories.
I saw that explanation. So is that something allowed? And then where do I find that?
That was one of the questions that we had the applicant confirm that based on our zoning ordinance definition. They did provide the extra calculations that we had requested. It was reviewed by our building official to confirm they met the definition of a half story. And it's the review of our building official says yes, based on their current calculations, they meet the requirements of a half story.
Yeah, but how do you connect it to the neighborhood node? Because in our estimate, with a lot of work from your side, we were able to implement that limitations, right? So that we can limit our height. One of the reasons was to have it less dense. Now we are kind of finding another way to incorporate 3 stories, which I don't know, I have seen any of this kind of buildings in Troy, probably not. And then safety standpoint and other things, I don't know. I mean, I'm a little concerned about why we are trying to do that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the question that we had raised is, does this comply in this, there's the spirit of the ordinance, there's also what the ordinance allows. So we questioned both what the spirit of the ordinance was trying to achieve and also what's allowed by the ordinance. So that's why we had them provide those extra calculations. By the definition of the zoning ordinance, they meet the requirement of 2.5 stories. However, it gets back to these standard questions I'm asking in terms of transitional features under the design standards, discussion from the site plan review standards. Okay, but do they meet those other standards as well? That's the question today. But in terms of technically, based on the review by the city's building official, they meet the 2.5-story requirement.
And then the other question I have is that there is a transparency requirement also, right?
Transparency?
Yeah, 50% in the front side.
30% on the front that faces the street, yes.
Yeah, so if half of the building is underground, how do you calculate the transparency? That will be another question I want
I
to
don't
make.
believe this has a basement. There's no basement. I think what you may be confused is the graphic in the zoning ordinance shows a basement, and that's just for graphical, that's just as part of to explain the definition of building height. The building here just has no basement.
There is a graphics that you showed that you explained which one is a mezzanine floor and which one is basement. There is a reason for explaining that, right?
That's a graphic from the zoning ordinance itself.
Okay.
Yes, it does not, the basement issue does not apply to this.
So the buildings that's proposed, those are at the plinth level, I mean, the ground level, or it's below?
Ground level. They're
Okay, yeah, that's probably my misunderstanding. So the only thing is like, we're making it, one floor is at the attic level. There is nothing on the basement, but one at the attic level.
Yeah, it's technically a half-story.
Height-wise building, the roof, is it, what is that? I didn't check.
34 feet to the peak and 30 feet.
No, I'm saying like, when you do a 2.5-story building, you do 3 floors, then it's just a general question. Is it you reduce the height?
Yeah, yes, the height, the 3rd story has a pitched roof and the height, and the total area has to be less than the 2 other stories below it.
Okay, and there is no regulation like what needs to happen,
There is. It's defined in the zoning ordinance, and that's why I had the building official confirm it. He, based on the calculation provided by the applicant, confirms that does meet the definition of a half-story.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Carlisle? I do know that the traffic consultant is here. If would the commissioners like to pose any questions to the traffic consultant? I see some heads nodding, so if you could come on up and introduce yourself and answer any questions the members of the commission might have.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Steve Deering, and I'm the practice leader for traffic engineering services for Orchard Hills and Climate. So any questions you might have, I'd be happy to try to help.
Good.
Yeah, thanks. So my question was, general issue or question I have is like the baseline level of traffic at that intersection, right? And I know you had some of that in the study, and then the impact of the incremental traffic as well. But here's the specific question. It talked about, I think, and I'm not maybe going to get all the language exactly right, but it talked about heavy traffic around rush hour. I think level of service, Ds and Es, and my understanding is the busiest is F that is measured. So it would just seem Ds and Es are objectively heavy traffic. And we're adding 160 plus units. So those are going to increase that level of traffic. And I guess what I was trying to understand is, even if the increase is relatively small, at what point does that even small increase exacerbate an issue to the point where you would either have an issue with the traffic or have mitigation requirements for the traffic?
Yes, okay. The applicant was requested and required to do a traffic study, and they looked at the various points of access for the development, as well as the major intersection of Crooks and Waddles. And based on the additional traffic that's anticipated, and a recognition that all the trips are not going to be going into that intersection, because literally these are residential units. The people that live here, if they work and commute during the high peak periods of the morning and evening rush hours, they're literally going in all 4 directions of the compass. I mean, they're spreading themselves out in all sorts of directions. So there is a measurable impact of this additional development at the major intersection that's under signal control. There is a recognition that with the traffic signal that's there, you always have the latitude to play with the timings a little bit, take a little bit of green time away from one movement and give it to another movement to try to best balance the average delays that everybody experiences when they come up to a traffic signal. And their conclusion, which I agree with, is that the scale of this development, while it has a measurable impact, it's an impact that is still not significant in terms of the ability of Crooks and Waddle to function successfully, not just for them, but for all of the users of the road network. In terms of what could push that over the threshold, so to speak, is when you overload a particular phase. Let's say, for argument's sake, let's say westbound left turns. And yeah, you know, Waddles has that center lane for left turns, it has a lot of lane storage, but at some point in time, you overwhelm the ability to give that movement enough green time, and any attempt to give them more green time with a dedicated left movement means that you're stealing so much time from all the other movements that average delay for all of the users starts to just skyrocket. That's not the case for this development, in this instance, for this intersection.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Sure, go ahead.
Again, appreciate that. I'm just trying to understand the objective metric that you would look at or an analyst would look at and say, at that intersection, there's a problem.
Well,
you said in their opinion, in your opinion, you know,
right.
So I get that, and I know you're the expert. I'm just trying to understand kind of what is, if there is, the objective trip point for it to be an issue.
Yeah.
And how far that corner is away from it.
There are some norms that are widely accepted in Southeast Michigan, and as a urban area that Troy is, we generally recognize that there are going to be spot locations that are congested. And by congested, we generally use as our jargon, our shorthand, a level of service grade of D. If it was a rural area or a very small community in a rural area, we would say our threshold trigger value is a C instead of a D. But this is an urbanized area. We just kind of gotten used to more congestion. When approaches, well, first of all, if the overall intersection starts to get down to a D, we start getting to look at it very carefully. We look to see if individual approaches are also at that level or worse. Individual movements are at that level or worse. So the threshold of a level of service of D is like our line in the sand, and whenever we start getting close to that, then we get very concerned. That's when we start looking at auxiliary turn lanes, and Troy has not had to experience it much yet, but that sometimes means that you go to double left turns. You widen the intersection, you have double left turns, double right turns. You do have several locations around town that have double right turns. But those are the types of tools in our toolbox when we start showing a lot of congestion at a particular pressure point in the network.
Ms. Malala, I think you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. In the report, and this is, I'm reading from page 11, after the traffic analysis was done, this is regarding future conditions, 2023. The delay that you mentioned of a 0.4 seconds for Crooks Road and Wattles Road, and Crooks Road and Sight Drive, the West Hills area, just about pretty much not much of an impact at all. I am not sure how these conclusions were drawn, to be honest. And the reason I say this, and ask you for some clarification too, by the way, is we are not accounting for all traffic movement as we speak today when we do traffic analysis. I hope I am correct in this, because we don't have all cars yet on the road because people are working from home. So many of them may not be moving during these peak hours that you mentioned. Two, we are not accounting for the school bus traffic that potentially will be flying through these roads to pick up students. And the reason I am expressing this and also seeking clarification on your traffic study is I live very close to Martell Elementary, and when the Livernois, on the condominium complex that came up on Livernois and East Square Lake happened, I am a victim of endless minutes on Livernois and East Square Lake, being two-lane traffic there, of making a turn. If I choose to go at that hour when the school buses are plying and the parents are dropping off kids, I'm in a mess. I cannot get to where I want to get. And I potentially see the same thing happening with the Wattles and Crook Road development. It's 162 homes we are talking about. Even if I were to say each home were to have 2 cars, I'm talking about 300 cars right there. Although they may not be moving at the same time, I'm just not satisfied with your, well, I guess I need clarification with this information here of just a 0.4 second delay, which is nothing. I don't think that would be an accurate reflection, considering what I'm seeing at some of these intersections. So please clarify.
Keep in mind, please, that when you see a number, like 24 seconds, that's considered the average, the arithmetic mean of all the vehicles. Some will get through with literally no delay. They're coming up Crooks Road, and they've timed it just right so that the light ahead of them turns green, and they can possibly slow down, but otherwise they just move through. Other traffic, they just catch the red, and they have to sit through the entire cycle, which is certainly longer than 24 seconds. So we're talking about averages here over an entire hour's worth of a peak volume, whether it's the morning or the evening. You've made 2 points. 1 point, we are yet still in a pandemic. We recognize that. We challenge the traffic consultants for developers, like I believe Julie's here, there's Julie, to try to make adjustments to the raw counts that they've taken to account for the fact that we have not yet come out of the pandemic. So, and the way you do that is you look at historical counts. You try to get a count at the exact same location, and if you see that the new count has less traffic than the older one, you make adjustments upward to recognize the fact that not everybody has resumed the normal commute patterns because they're working from home or other things like that. Maybe they're not working from homes, but they're flexing their time, so they're not traveling during the peak commute periods, whatever the reason. So we make adjustments that way. Generally speaking, we always try to take counts while the primary schools are in session, because it's not just the school buses, but it's also the parents driving their kids. So we recognize that as an issue, and we're always encouraging the consultants working for the developers to take their data collection in the correct season when schools are in session, and we're always looking to verify if traffic has resumed or is still being depressed because of the pandemic that we know that we're in. So those types of adjustments were all considered in their report.
Thank you.
And again, the numbers are representing averages over an entire hour. Any individual driver will certainly experience something different than that.
That's true. Thank you.
Mr. Krent, did you have your hand
Yeah,
up?
that was kind of answered already. But
Okay, all right. Mr. Rahman.
So you mentioned the average number, right? So do you have other numbers also that like a maximum and minimum? And how many? What is the maximum delay that somebody can encounter?
When you start talking about maximums,
Because the average is, if you don't have the number, because I'm an engineer, I deal with the numbers all the time. So I like when people talk about numbers. So I like to know what is the max delay. The other one is, what is the factor, the adjusted factor that you used between pre-COVID and COVID? I like to know that. That one should be handy. You should be able to give me.
within the first 6 to 9 months of COVID being experienced throughout the country, especially here in Michigan. So now we're talking about last year, June, July, August, that kind of time period. We were measuring traffic dropping by upwards, and it varied, but there were portions of I-75 where traffic was down 60% below normal. Other communities, maybe in the 40% range. Yeah, and again, it varied widely. There were a few outlier type communities that almost saw no traffic drop at all. And there were others that had even more than 60%. It was kind of all over the board, but generally you could really tell that traffic was very much depressed. The last time I went through this exercise, actually for the city of Southfield, we found portions of Southfield that were essentially back to normal. And yet a couple blocks, major miles, I should say, a couple of major miles away from Southfield Road, for example, they were still maybe down 10, 15%. So there's been a lot of recovery, but it is not uniform. It's kind of episodic in terms of what locations are kind of back and which ones are still lagging. And that's why we try to have the developers, traffic folks, take a close look at that wherever the development is being proposed. We cannot assume that things are still way down or back. We have to find out, given the specific location, that they're going to be impacting.
Can I just continue?
Go ahead.
Yeah, please. So the reason I'm asking this is, Troy is a different community. A lot of people, they work in the OEMs, and then they're professionals mostly. And I know that I've been working in my basement for the last 2.5 years, since March, 2 years, almost 2 years, yeah. So I think the way you are saying is kind of fuzzy, that, although you boldly said that we used a factor that actually adjusted, but it seems like we need to do a lot more work to understand what really is the pre-COVID traffic and how it's going to impact the new apartment, the new complex.
I'm not...
Because, we are talking about like hundreds of pages of numbers, right? And then if at the end the conclusion is kind of not clear, then it doesn't make sense to me.
Okay, so what Julie has kindly provided is the excerpt of their traffic study where they actually show what the traffic adjustments are for the pandemic. And based on these, on average, they were increasing the counts that they had taken by at least 28% up to just under 40%, depending on the approaches, based on those old counts versus the most recent counts. So they put a lot of additional volumes back onto the modeling that they had done, rather than just only relying on the counts that had been taken explicitly for the study.
So that means you said 28%, bump it up by 28%. Is that what you're saying?
On average, depending on whether it's the AM or the PM, they bumped up the AM by 39%, the PM by 28%.
They did it by approach.
But they actually did it by approach. So some approaches, like the 39%. Northbound Crooks, they increased it 73%.
But the question I was, what was the basis for having this 28% or 40%? If you consider the I-75 traffic or some other as a baseline, then that will not be appropriate because of the type of people live here. Because most of the Troy residents are professionals, and then they're working from home. That's basically my point that I was trying to make. But that's okay. I already got my number, so I appreciate that.
The point is that they were trying to look at historical counts in this immediate area.
Right.
To compare before COVID and what's happening now. And based on that, they took their most current counts and inflated them because they were recognizing, and I certainly agree, that this particular area has not yet recovered from the pandemic.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Parakis?
Hi, thank you for being here. When I was reading the report, I kept seeing the references to LOS, the level of service, and I didn't know what it meant, so I went ahead and Googled the term until I found it defined, many pages later. So I want to ask a question before I make any assumptions, but I found online from the Highway Capacity Manual the exact same chart that was provided by you, level of service A, B, C, where A, B, and C are basically free flow or stable flow. My point is, in the one that I found, it actually gives a description. So a level of service D, which equates to the 35 to 55 seconds, it says approaching unstable flow, tolerable delay, occasionally wait through more than one signal cycle before proceeding. And then level of service E, unstable flow, intolerable delay. Is that about accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. So at our current existing conditions, which are during COVID, we're already operating at the level of service E during peak hours, which is intolerable delays and unstable flow. And you had mentioned that you guys meaning the traffic experts, start becoming concerned, very concerned in fact, when we approach level of service D. So I have huge concerns that we're already during rush hour in an intolerable levels of traffic. I live a mile from there. I witness it all day long. I think that, I'm a planning commissioner in the city of Troy, not New York City, not LA, where the expectations for traffic are quite different. I think people move to Troy to not have to worry about sitting in traffic and sitting through lights. So I guess when we look at the fact that we're at that level of service E, and then we're proceeding to say that we don't really have concerns, that concerns me. Then a question for you, that's really a comment. My question for you would be, I see an annual crash average of 35 for Waddles. I believe it's the portion of Crooks heading north to Waddles, 35 a year. Is that correct?
I did not pull the crash statistics for this location.
Oh, that's not part of your report?
The report was done by Fleece and Vanderbilt.
Right. Okay.
I was just reviewing the modeling that they had done for their capacity calculations.
Can you, I'm not sure if it's your area, but are you able to, the question is sort of general, and at what level of crashes, because 35 a year, is about every other week, right? More than that. So at what level of crashes do we start saying that an intersection looks dangerous?
Okay, this can be an involved discussion. There is no numerical threshold to suggest that an intersection is dangerous. What we try to do is we recognize that however you want to count crashes, there is a bias involved. For example, if you just count the number of crashes in a year's time, for example, and then you rank list those intersections, you're going to find that almost all of the ones that are at the top of the list happen to be the busiest roads. because the bias is the more traffic, the more interactions between the traffic, the greater the likelihood that two or more vehicles are going to strike each other. On the other hand, you could try to account for this difference in traffic volume by doing not a crash frequency, but a crash rate. And you take into consideration the volume of traffic, so that if you have two different intersections, and let's say you have two different intersections and they both had 35 crashes a year, but this intersection had twice the traffic than that, which is the more dangerous? Not danger in an absolute sense, but just as a relative. Well, it's probably the one that has less traffic because that's less conflicts, but the same number. But that has another bias. You can have, and I was a city traffic engineer for Rochester Hills, so this is the my favorite story about this. You can do this for intersections, but you can also do it for road segments. And there was a road in Rochester Hills that every single year for over a decade was the highest ranked crash road based on crash rate when you took volume into consideration. And it was a gravel road that had one crash a year because it only had something like 150 vehicles a day. And the crash was always ice, drove off the road, hit a tree, always. So on the other hand, again, thinking about Rochester Hills, where I spent over a decade of my life, the highest frequency was almost always Rochester at Auburn Road, two state roads, over 150,000 vehicles a day entering the intersection, and it was almost always clocking in at about 120 to 150 crashes a year. Now, crash numbers, well, does it matter if some of these crashes are hurting people as opposed to it's only property damage? Well, that's a different kind of way of measuring crashes. You look at severity. You know, you put a weight on fatals and the kind of crashes that result in incapacitating injuries, and maybe a lesser weight for the minor injuries or the complaint of an injuries, and then you don't even care about the fender benders. So when it comes to crashes, there's so many different ways to slice and dice the information, depending on what your objective is in terms of, if I'm going after federal money for safety improvements, I have to look at severity because that's how the funding source looks. If I'm looking at routine maintenance, you know, pavement can get polished, and that means you have a greater propensity for rear end crashes. Then I'll look at just total numbers. If I'm trying to, I've got a pot of money and I want to spread it as much as possible, then maybe I'm going to be looking at crash rates, or a combination of all three. So you say that this location has 35 crashes in a year. That would not have even have been considered an average intersection in Rochester Hills. And I do recognize that Rochester Hills is different than Troy. I don't run the crash numbers for Troy. The city has not asked that as a service. It's something I can easily do. But if you're going to get into that kind of business, then what you want to do is not just do it once. You want to track it over time. So that's another issue where sometimes an intersection will jump up and have a lot of crashes in a single year for you don't know why, but the next year it's down way down on the list. So you want to track it over time so you can see what the patterns are over time. Then you're going to be in a position to actually know where you have hazardous locations that have to be addressed somehow. And I can't tell you what this location represents for Troy.
Any more questions for Mr. Deering?
My apologies for being so long-winded.
Well, we learned a lot tonight, so thank you very much. All right, are we ready to hear from the petitioner at this point in time? If the petitioners would come up to the front. And Ms. Dufresne, a quick question for you for procedure, because Mr. Carlisle covered both projects, because we're talking about Westington Phase 2 right now. Should our questions of the petitioner just deal with Phase 2 of Westington, or is it both projects we can ask about?
Well, I guess, I don't know if the petitioner is prepared to talk combined, or were you going to talk about them separately? I don't know what your presentation is.
Let's combine them.
Then I think you can ask questions about both.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yes, if you could introduce yourself.
Chairman, good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the commission. My name is Peter Stuhlreier of Design House Architecture, 3300 Auburn Road, Auburn Hills, Michigan. And we don't have a lot of crashes right there at that intersection, just FYI. I'm here to discuss the two projects, Westington Phase 2 and Hills West, and answer any questions that you might have and go over some of the objections that have been stated. Let me start by saying, kind of from a summary level as the architect and designer of the project, that these three projects, as they stand together, meet your code of height, use, density, parking, landscape, tree removal, tree replacement, traffic flow, fire, and probably a couple other items. So it's my goal, my role as the architect to make sure that that is the case when we bring these in front of you. There are times when there are gray areas. This isn't one of those times when there's gray areas. We are bringing a project that complies. The architecture, I think, is exemplary for this type of use. There is a demand for these types of units. These are the units we're adding are all two-bedroom units in a accessible first floor for all types of people, ages, and we're providing balconies on the project as well, with a significant amount of retained landscape, especially on the east, and we have considered the question that Ben brought up about the preservation of the additional trees. And to your point, Mr. Krent, the report did state that a lot of the trees were fair. It just didn't state them all as good, and I'm not sure what the metric is on that, but I can assure you there's nothing nefarious about a report like that. A fair tree is probably a reasonable tree that needs help. But at the same time, the use of the preservation of those trees is a lot more than just taking a few of those trees and preserving them. As you know, from a engineering and grading and landscaping and utilities perspective, the maintaining the natural grade of where those trees are would probably require us to reduce, based on the diagrams that were shown, probably requires to reduce the density by almost a half, if not a half, of what we're proposing, which makes the project infeasible immediately. So it's the fact that we're replacing the trees. Remember that we're replacing the trees with a better species of tree, with an irrigated and maintained tree as well. So maybe on day one we're talking about half the inches in caliper, but you know, in the years to come you've got a much better variety of healthy and I would say approved tree species throughout the project. So in a way, we're improving that, and among other improvements for civil engineering, and the civil engineer is here to comment, as well as the landscape architect. Stormwater management, drainage, utilities, all improvements to the current project, or to the current state of the site. So with that, you know, I'd love to answer questions about the architecture and about the layout and the design, and I can parlay the other questions to civil and to landscape and to developer if necessary. They're all here.
Thank you. Any questions for the petitioner? Ms. Parakis.
So for the design standard in section 5.6E, which says that the building orientation and entrance, the primary building entrance shall be clearly identifiable and usable and located in the front facade parallel to the street. The buildings for the Hills West seem to be sideways. So the side entrance is fronting Crooks and not the primary entrance, which would violate the zoning ordinance.
I think that ordinance probably refers to a public entrance of a building, not necessarily a private residence. But as we do have several front-facing balconies which do have doors facing the street, you know, I can certainly see a way where both of those situations make it so that these two apartment buildings could comply with that.
I didn't follow you thought that it was meant for what?
When they're stating that the front entrance to a building needs to face the street, I believe that that's a reference to a public entrance to a commercial building and not necessarily entrances to a townhouse or to an apartment building, which would be around the perimeter of the building. In other words, there's entrances on all four sides of the building.
Understood. I believe that it's the building orientation and the entrance. I don't read it the same way, but that's fine.
Any other questions for the petitioner?
Okay.
Mr.
Maybe
Krantz.
A follow-up. So where is the entrance on the, we're talking about the Hills West and the far north property line, there's a lot of landscaping at that point. Where are the entrance? Is there an entrance, that white rectangle, is that an entrance?
No, that's a balcony.
Okay.
And it's also an entrance to that unit. The other two small tick marks on the sides are entrances into the, well, they're about the entrances into the common hallway.
Okay, so there's no entrance into the building from the north side.
Ben, if you could put up the side elevation. The long elevation. Right there, yep. You can see the entrances there. The balcony indent is in the center, and to the left and right of the balcony entrance are the common stair entrances that lead to the upper level units.
Okay, so, but I'm, okay. Not the best drawing I've seen as far as easy to understand, but it looks like there's two doors colored in gray on you know, like the third from the left and the third from the right. Those are doors, entrance doors?
That's right.
So they go to the woods. I didn't see a sidewalk there. On the north side.
Can you put, are we on Hills West or Westington?
Hills West. So on the north side.
Right.
Of that building one, that was the elevation was shown?
North is, which side? North is this side?
North is to the left, yes.
North is my left?
Correct. So are there doors on that side?
No, not on that side. They're only on one side.
Okay, so what did I see in that elevation?
The parking lot side, where you park, you get out of your car, you walk through the door.
What's the elevation on the north side look like?
The same. Can you go back to that? Do you have you don't have floor plans up, do you, Ben?
I have them in the presentation. They're in the packet.
I mean, there's illustrations and floor plans as well.
I just wanted to see the elevation on that side of the building, that's all.
There you can see the automotive parking lot along with the front. Oh, go back.
I was going to go to Hills West, but that's.
There you go. But it's the same building. There you go. There's the entrances and the staircases.
Okay,
On the other
I
side.
still don't see the elevation on the north side. Where is that one?
On the other side, it's simply, instead of a door, it's a window.
Okay, all right.
For every building, that's the ground floor of every building.
Okay.
And the doors face the logical entry point by the cars.
Okay, is that a door going into a closet or something? In that middle the middle room on the upper end,
Yeah.
that door goes into what,
A mechanical.
mechanical?
Yeah,
Okay, so
right.
there's no doors going out that side of the building?
On that drawing, the 2 doors leave the staircase on the top,
Okay,
and the sliding doors enter all the balconies that are recessed.
okay, so that goes to a parking lot. Then the other elevation that I don't see,
Right?
that goes to the woods.
Yeah, that is the side on the woods. That's
Okay.
correct.
All right, good. Okay, thanks.
And Mr. Hudson.
Mr. Strubler, I've got a couple of questions on open space.
Yes, sir.
I heard our planning director indicate that you are going to meet the minimum requirements for open space by combining these projects for that purpose into one. Is that correct?
That is half correct. We are
That's
combining
not correct.
only 1 and 2. 1 and 2 combined to create 20%, 20.99%. Hills West stands on its own with 20.47%.
Okay, and what is that open space going to consist of?
Trees, landscape, grass.
Okay. Then a question for the city attorney, if I may. Can you have 2 site plans combined for one purpose to achieve an open space requirement under the ordinance for each plan?
Mr. Hudson, I'm going to defer to Mr. Savinant on that. I believe there's precedent for that. I can't think of a project.
The sites would have to be required prior to final site plan approval.
To be combined.
They'd have to be, what did I say?
They'd have-
They'd have to be combined as a condition. So prior to site plan approval, the sites would have to be combined.
Well, is there a requirement that each site must have a minimum on its own for open space?
Well,
Is there a provision in the ordinance for combining plots to make open space requirements met?
not specifically, no.
Westington Phase 1 meets it alone, correct?
Yes.
Right.
So their intent is to combine these parcels.
Well, I know, but I'm just wondering of legality of combining different projects to combine one purpose for one project.
Can I say, it is only the Westington project that's being combined. Hills West is a standalone project and meets the criteria of standalone: parking, open space, height, density.
I guess I'm confused. You tell me it meets the ordinance requirements.
Hills West meets the ordinance requirements.
Is it being combined with another project?
Doesn't need to be. It meets everything. Only the 2 phases of Westington are being combined, and they're only being, well, they're being combined, they're always going to be combined, but they meet the requirement when combined for open space.
Well, I think it's begging the question. If you've got to combine them, then each one individually does not meet the open space requirement unless they're combined. So if I owned a project and you owned a project and you said, I want to combine them to meet a requirement, and I said, no, you can't do that. I don't want to do that.
Well, there's no really good path for us to bring a second phase of a project to the planning commission without calling it a second phase and
Well, yeah,
designating it.
I understand, and that's probably one of the problems developers have when they're trying to work with limited space. I just have some questions if you can do that.
There's also the question of why we didn't take Westington and just make it an amended site plan for the whole thing, and I think that was just an administrative.
But would have, could have, should have, that's not what you did.
But it is what it is at this
All
point.
right, so it's going to be just open space for your open space? Nothing's going to be on there? No recreational requirements, no picnic tables, nothing like that?
There's recreation space in the Westington on the north.
And what does that consist of?
I believe we go back to Westington Phase 1 and find out, but it's play set and grill and picnic tables, benches, and so on and so forth.
All right.
Okay. Mr. Rahman.
So, Westington Phase 1 is a separate project, right? It's approved, it's being worked on. So why are we bringing this in this discussion? Just a general question.
Why are we bringing what into?
Why are we taking the advantage of an approved project being worked on for a new project? Why that? Because Westington Phase 2 has to have the required open space.
Correct.
So it doesn't meet the requirement. Phase 2 only.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
I think I'm following you.
Yeah. No.
Westington is one development. This just happens to be the second phase a few years later. And together, they meet that
Yeah.
requirement.
Because, if I look at the top view, I only see parking lots. And I know that I don't have to say that again because this is a neighborhood node B. It's node I, which is supposed to be less intense. So I don't know if you are aware of it as an architect. It's just a question to you.
I am aware that we comply with your codes.
That's zoning, because you are in front of Planning Commission, not zoning ZBA. I just want to make sure that you know that, because you have to answer these questions.
Okay.
So
You're asking me to change the density to a number that I can't find anywhere. Is that what you're saying? Did I have to lower my intensity?
my first question
my
was
density?
just to make sure that you agree with me that the phase 2 doesn't meet the requirement. So we cannot approve phase 2. It's one at a time, And then the second one is just a general comment that I made that it seems like it's all parking lot. There is no amenities. We're adding 60 families into it. I mean, we have been having some discussions lately, and we had our node walk and everything, so I don't know if you're aware of it. We got a lot of feedback from our residents. And I'm just wondering, if you had a chance to talk to our city officials and then what our residents want. And as an architect, because, I see architects that they see the future, they see, I have very high feeling about the architects. As an engineer, I felt like we are just crunching numbers, but architects really see things. What do you think about that? Do you think that
I think architects are visionaries. Yeah.
Right.
Engineers are number crunchers. Right. That's
right. So that one of the corner is your proposal, and last time when it was proposed, I did not agree. I'm the only one who did not agree. Although you guys made some change. Now you are adding another 60 families into that 4+ some acres of property.
We're adding 30 to the Westington, right?
30 and 30, 60 in the 4+ some acres of property. So it doesn't make sense to me. I just want to give my comment because, this is not something that the residents want. This is not going to be something good for public health, safety, and welfare. There is no amenities there.
We can agree to disagree on each one of those points.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, we reduced the density and the height of every one of these new buildings from the first phase. So we listened, we heard, we broke the massing up, we lowered them, and we added a silhouette to the roof line and a lot more brick. And I think we did a good job bringing this project. And I think it's the right project for the area. And I don't think projects, as an architect, in Oakland County in front of these boards twice a week. I don't think projects are freestanding. Are freestanding. I think they're part of a bigger community. So when we talk about amenities, we talk about Troy, we talk about the schools, we talk about the parks, we talk about the community center, we talk about all that stuff. We talk about the sidewalks, the athletic trails, the good roads. We don't just look at this and say, where's your park, where's your pool, where's your tennis court, where's your office center. This is apartments.
Right.
That's what this is.
Because
it's part of a bigger picture.
You are assigned to this corner, right? The one of the 4 corners.
Yeah.
We are assigned for all 4 corners. And then when the traffic department says that this is okay, but a little bit more than the congestion, so we have to think about, like, I know that there are going to 3 other proposals coming pretty soon for the same node. So we have to think of that, and based on that, we have to balance it. And that's basically my understanding and how I'm going to make the decision. Thank you.
Any more questions for the architect? Yes, Ms. Malala.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a question regarding, and you must have heard this in Mr. Carlisle's presentation, regarding your Phase 2 project and the clump of trees that sit on the north side, and how we could, or you could think about saving those trees by reducing the size and structure of these apartments? Because those trees, if they are ones that can be saved and could be saved, do you have anything in mind? Or is this something that you are comfortable?
I don't like the idea of removing trees. But I see these kind of developments on roads and corners and intersections like this every day. Trees go, and more trees take their place. And there's, to save a tree, to subjectively pick trees to save, like I said before, you're taking half the density out of the plan. And I'm not sure what the benefit of that really is at the end of the day, because all of the roads, the utilities, the master planning, the zoning, the thoughts about density throughout Troy have always contemplated, or have recently contemplated, this type of project and this type of land. So to say, okay, well, there's some trees there, take half the density out, it's just, you're basically, the project is over. I mean, you can't afford to do a project with 15 units on an acre and a half and to preserve some trees. But that's just economics speaking. And by the way, I heard a really fun fact from the Forestry Association. Do you know how many minutes it takes the North American forest to grow enough lumber to build this development? In the North American forest, how many minutes does it take to grow the lumber? 5 minutes for this. So just a thought about trees and how sustainable they are to use and to replant. So,
I have one more question,
Go ahead.
if I may. Did you get a chance to talk to any of the neighbors that are already there around the property, around the area that this property is being proposed?
I haven't heard from neighbors, I don't think, on this particular phase, no.
So you do know that on Briar Lane, there is a single-family home?
I do.
Way back?
I do.
You never did get a chance to kind of talk to them, to just kind of get their feelings of?
Through the developer, I did. And that's why the buildings are so far away from that particular property line, and that the buffer is so heavily landscaped back there. There were better ways to lay this out from just an engineering standpoint, and they didn't have to do with pushing the buildings all the way to the bottom of the parking lot, to the west. So we were attempting to break the building, send the gable down towards that house, and then buffer that edge, because we know that it's neighborly to design like that. And that there was some objection, but if there was intense objection, you would have that family in the room right now, I would assume, if it was that intense. And the cutoff of the Berry Lane access, I think, was another thing that was thought through for his benefit.
What are we talking in terms of the height of the trees that you intend to use as buffer between their property and your development?
The mature height or the planted height?
Let's just talk about both of them. The planted height, what are we looking at?
Mike Pizzola.
Good evening, Mike Zola, landscape architect, Designers Architecture. The evergreen trees would be 7 to 8 foot in height, and the deciduous trees would be 3-inch caliber.
What about when they're mature?
What's the mature?
Oh, evergreen trees, 75. After, I will never see it, but, growth rate about a foot a year. So an 8-foot tree in 20 years would be 30 feet. Same with deciduous trees. And, these trees are all native trees, or more suitable for the area, and are not evasive, cottonwoods, elms, ash. These are all, approved woodland trees by the Nursery Association.
So if I might ask a follow-up question, since these are apartments and they don't have an HOA-like, quite possibly these apartments are going to be then managed by a property company. And some of these trees, if they don't function to their fullest ability or they die, how do you plan to make sure that, first of all, the open space requirement is not met for each for phase 2 of your development. But in general speaking, we are talking about a suburban area which is going to have so much development coming their way. And if you don't have enough buffer zones built in, it's going to look like an urban jungle. How is that going to be done? And and the reason I bring this up is recently I did see a development where the trees were put as a buffer, but unfortunately, due to lack of upkeep and maintenance, some of these trees have turned brown and since completely gone. So now I'm seeing these gaps in some of these areas. It looks ugly, and also at the same time, this is a residential area which needs a kind of barrier to keep this urban jungle from being projected onto the roads in a very big way. Just aesthetically speaking, I'm asking you.
I don't know what's in place as far as replacement trees after they're planted when they die, the time frame, but as they're established, they'll mature and fill in. And just like people, trees are susceptible to disease and death, and some may eventually die. And it would be up to the community to, the property manager to replace those trees if they deem necessary. But once they're established or once they start growing, after that time period of when they need to be replaced, if they do die, I think 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, they're on their own. You know, they'll start filling in, and they may drop seeds and reproduce. They may die. It's nature, you know? You really can't.
Well, it's up to property management is the answer, to manage it.
Exactly.
And the success of the development and the success of the community will mandate the upkeep of the development.
I would hope so, yes, that is true. One last question before I pass on the mic to others. I'm sorry I'm taking some time here, but I just wanted a clarification on phase 2. What is that in the space that sits in between? If you can please explain that to me. Between the two buildings, that is?
That's a landscape green space.
So what is intended to be there? Are there going to be lawn area?
Yep, it's lawn and deciduous trees.
Thank you.
Any more questions for the,
That's where the bicycle rack is also there.
Is also there.
is this a quick question, Mr. Rahman? I know I want to get to the residents as soon as possible, but go
Yeah,
ahead.
just a quick question. And I see that this is the drawing that you have, and you have that the trees,
Yeah.
And they're 3 feet apart, right? When they grow, you expect that it'll be all covered. Is that
That's true.
expectation?
Yes.
So the transition idea that neighborhood B, type B transition idea is to have some relationship with the neighbors, right? So do you think that it is violating the master plan idea or the zoning ordinance idea?
So a requirement of the zoning ordinance is between single family and, I'll say non-single family, regardless of what the use in this particular site would be, is a requirement that you have screening trees. So this is an ordinance requirement. The evergreens at every 3 feet is an ordinance requirement with regards to the screening.
Yeah, but then on top of that, the master plan requirement, or even zoning board, I can read it from the zoning ordinance, that you're supposed to have, in type B type situation, you're supposed to have good transition so that the residents can go to that village. That's the idea, right? That the neighborhood node is kind of like a center place where everybody can walk in and enjoy. So it seems like we are violating that by having like a.
I think that the village concept is a concept of the master plan for sure, and some elements composed to the zoning ordinance. I don't think the intent though was to allow for anyone to enter into private. I mean, this is private. This is still private property.
I mean, I have a copy of the zoning ordinance with me, and I actually did not get a chance to read the master plan because I did not, because I only read the zoning ordinance, and I have seen a couple of times it talks about that village idea, less intensity, and then especially for the type B, where we need to make sure that it's not like type A, where we have more high dense apartment like the proposal that we are seeing here, and then, of course, commercial building. And then in type A itself, there will be a buffer, which will be type B, right? You saw that. So I just feel like, this is not in the right place. But thank you.
I only have one quick question for you. Mr. Carlisle asked us to ask you about the need for additional guest parking. Do you believe that your plan provides enough guest parking on the site?
From my experience in this region, the calculations set forth by the zoning code, again, the zoning code, contemplate the guest parking. So it's just a factoring issue. If they wanted guest parking, in some communities, they'll have a number of spaces additional for each unit. If not, they just raise the ratio, and in this case, they've raised it to 2. Many communities are 1.5, 1.25, 1.75, plus 1 per 4 units for guests. In your case, it's written, and in my experience, and I can't read anybody's mind, but that contemplates guest parking in the ratio. So if you include vacancies plus the single car families or single car people that are going to have here, you're in my experience, you will be overparked here anyway. So we're not going to have guest parking issues.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I'm gonna, we have one more person that needs to speak here.
Can I just make a procedural request regarding the meeting?
Yeah.
Hi, good evening to the Planning Commission. My name is Arben Staffa. And this is mostly, I believe it could be directed to the Assistant City Attorney or to the Planning Commission. But as you may know, Planning Commission decisions are quasi-judicial in nature in that they can result in the deprivation of owners' property rights, and the applicants are thus generally afforded procedural due process rights under the 14th Amendment. So just regarding public commentary, so adverse testimony in regard to application can have the effect of depriving a party of their by right property rights. The due process clause gives the party who may be deprived of the rights the opportunity to cross-examine any adverse testimony. So other jurisdictions throughout Michigan and across the country have provided zoning applicants with the opportunity to cross-examine witnesses regarding adverse testimony in a public hearing. And I can provide 2 cities as an example, of which I have, and I'm sure there's definitely more. So we request the opportunity to cross-examine each witness after his or her testimony regarding our applications, and also that the board, so that's pretty much it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Frayne, did you wish to respond to that?
Mr. Staffa, I don't know if you introduced yourself to the board.
Hi, Arben Staffa with the applicant.
Mr. Staffa, this is not a public hearing. The public has an opportunity to be provided notice, an opportunity to be heard, just as you as the applicant have an opportunity to be noticed and heard. So I'm not going to permit you an opportunity to cross-examine the public.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, with that, we will open the public hearing, and as we mentioned, I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's not a public hearing.
Oh, I'm sorry, we're going to open up for public comment. Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Frayne. So if each resident or anyone that wishes to give public comment at this time would come forward and introduce yourself, and then be sure to sign in on the form there. So, and normally we limit you to 3 minutes, but unless we have hundreds of people who are going to comment, we'll give you some leeway. But I would encourage everyone to try to specifically address this topic and make sure you don't duplicate other information. So, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Jerry Rauch again. I've put my address in. I'll do my best to keep my comments to less than 3 minutes. But I'd like to know before I begin, are we speaking about 1 site plan review or 2?
I think
Are you-
we're talking about doing it both. I think we're talking about both plans at once.
Okay, so then in that case, I would assume that if I run over the 3 minutes, it would be 6 minutes.
Don't worry about it. We're not.
Okay, so I don't want to start off this way, but it sounds like we just heard another demand or threat or some kind of statement about a by right development. And The nodes, as Mr. Rahman was talking about earlier, were developed with different levels of intensity. Some nodes are node A's and some are B's. And then within the node itself, you've got the ability to transition from the center of the node where the most intensive uses can be developed to the outer parts of the node where the less intensive parts of the unit of development can occur. Mr. Carlisle was asked about node B and types of uses, types of developments, and only mentioned the larger scale, like four-story buildings. And obviously in that category, in accordance with the master plan, which was shown on page 84, townhouses are considered to be in an urban environment. They were described in that document as higher intensity, not low intensity. And the nodes in the zoning ordinance and the master plan, when they set them up, they were intended to be villages, but that's kind of failed. And complying with the master plan and the zoning ordinance forces the design to provide compatibility with the surrounding community. They did this by allowing uses from commercial and four-story buildings to attached residential, but not all those uses are allowed or intended to be everywhere. Instead, the required transitioning was dependent upon the node ranking of its intensity, its tiered density, as shown in the master plan. And it left you to decide if the plan followed the development guidelines for trees, transition, compatibility to the adjacent uses. The perfect example of the low intensity use is the quads and duplexes that are over at John R. and Waddles that all of you saw when you walked the area. I wanted to also point out that Phase 1 was approved in its configuration. A lot of people raised objections to Phase 1 because they thought it was too intensive for that area. That development ended up being approved with the open space that it's got for the 100 units that are there. And now to try and combine all of these at the expense of Phase 1 and what was already approved, and the features that it were approved with, well, except for maybe the entrance to the 7-Eleven, is just unreasonable. On the last thing I wanted to say on the in compliance with the master plan and the zoning ordinance, as it relates to Phase 1, as I've talked about many times before, Section 5.06E, Phase 2, not Phase 2, the West Hills. Phase 2 is different. 5.06E1A on the West Hills, or Hills West, states that the primary building entrance shall be clearly identifiable and usable located in the front facade parallel to the street. That's the exact wording. The diagram of the building that you had up there showed the entrances to two stairwells on one side of the building. So they came in and there were access to the 4 units on the bottom of the building and the units upstairs from one side of the building. So on West Hills, those entrances are off the parking lot. They're not off the street. Then in addition to that, Section 5.06E3A states, quote, primary building facades placed away from the residential use. So that supports it. That's, again, the zoning ordinance and the master plan built on this plan to try and provide for transitioning. And in terms of transitioning, Section 8.06 requires transitional features, which can include setbacks, and it states, quotes, intended to be used in combination with landscape buffers or large setbacks. And there's no transitional features here. They've got the minimum setback line with trees for screening, but there's no transition. And then 8.06B6 says, include community amenities that add value to the development, such as patio, seating areas, et cetera. It says located in areas accessible to the public, and there's no visible amenities being provided here. Phase 1 stood on its own, and it had those. It shouldn't be allowed to be stolen from to try and cheat the system on this. Lastly, you can't make the developer combine these. They're two separate parcels, and they're divided by something that was already approved. So they really need to stand on their own. And as it relates to sections 5.06 and 8.06, as Mr. Carloy pointed out, those are things that you guys are supposed to decide on. He didn't give you any of the details, like E1A saying you have to have the primary entrance on the street, or any of the details as it relates to the site design and transition and landscape elements. So unfortunately, you've got to go look for those issues yourself and decide on whether it complies or not. And I don't believe it complies. Thanks for your time.
Next person.
Good evening. My name is Paul Bayless. I'm a 40-year resident of Troy. I live in the Woodlands of Troy subdivision, which is on the northwest corner.
Sign in too, so.
I'm signed in already.
Okay, good.
Northwest corner of Crooks and Waddles. I guess overall first comment, if this is visionary and this is what we're going to see in Troy, it makes me extremely nervous and sad for the rest of our children and the rest of the time that I'll be here living in Troy. But anyway, just a comment. I'm here to urge the Planning Commission to reject the proposed expansion and new development. Wanted to specifically address the traffic situation, and I am very glad that there were some great comments already by the Planning Commission members that got through the 184 pages of documentation. The traffic study included in the background material uses the rating system that we talked about, A through E, A being 10 seconds or less of delay per vehicle, F being 80% or 80 seconds per vehicle. And the rating system is also meant to measure the level of driver discomfort and frustration, fuel consumption, and lost travel time. And if we look at the three scenarios that were run in the traffic report, one was the current situation, one was 2023 without this development, and one was 2023 with the development. I have a major concern that when we look at traffic studies, we're only looking at the one development at a point in time. I think somebody mentioned there are three more proposals for this corner. So if we just focus on the one and we get an incremental 1.6 seconds here, 0.4 seconds here, as they used to say, pretty soon we're talking about real time, particularly when you look at the thousands and thousands of vehicles that go through those corners every day. Currently, in the traffic area, it's level D or better, except for, and this was interesting, except for the corner of Crooks and Waddles. What else is there, I guess, except for the other one that is currently problematic, which is the 7-Eleven entrance, where long vehicle queues are observed during peak afternoon hours. In scenario 2, which is without considering this development, southbound traffic turning onto Waddles from Crooks is expected to deteriorate significantly from where it is at the current time. And under scenario 3, which considers the impact of the development, the Crooks and Waddles Road intersection on an overall basis, which I believe the traffic consultant indicated is a red flag, goes to an overall E rating, which again is, I believe, 55 to 80 seconds of delay average per vehicle. The study then concludes in an apparently upbeat manner, if you read it quickly, that this is like good news, that all study intersection approaches will continue to operate in the manner similar to existing conditions with minor additional delays. In other words, they will operate very poorly. There will be significant driver discomfort and frustration, high fuel consumption, and lost travel time. So to say this is really good because we're kind of status quo just takes something that just makes absolutely no sense and tries to label it as just minor incremental changes. So two other quick comments. When we discussed the neighborhood node at a different location, we talked about enhancing the compatibility and providing transition between land uses. I guess I'm missing the transition here between the land uses. Also enhance the character, environment, and safety for pedestrians. I haven't seen anything in this plan that would indicate that the compatibility and character for pedestrians is being enhanced. So I would urge the Planning Commission to vote against this proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next person, come on up.
Hello, Planning Commission. I'm Laura Lipinski, 4233 Carson Drive in Troy. Been a resident here for about 40 years as well. Moved here when I was 2. So I remember I know the whole transition of Troy. It's a great city. I wanted to keep it a great city. I'm also here on behalf of the Woodlands of Troy Woodlands of Troy Homeowners Association. And as you can tell, I'm not like a good public speaker. I'm not used to speaking in front of people. So anyways, they wanted me to read this letter, but I think Jerry, kind of everything that I said in the letter is probably going to be what Jerry said anyways. So, but there were a lot of people that wanted to come and protest and are against this development, but because of COVID issues, they didn't feel comfortable coming, or scheduling issues, they weren't comfortable, changing their schedules because it's last minute. And I do agree that we should have more notice with these things, because Friday before this meeting is really ridiculous for everybody to continuously look on the website and see what's going on, and then figure out the 146 pages and read that. I'm like, we're all busy people, so, and I'm sure you guys are too, and you would like to have more time about that as well. So yeah, that's basically all I have to say. And also too, I do remember when the Westington Phase 1 came, I was involved in that too. And I remember them talking about this site was conditional on them getting the EVA onto the Berry Lane Drive, and there was no talk about the EVA into 7-Eleven. And I do think that there's a big issues with that coming into 7-Eleven, and the possibility of even more traffic coming out of 7-Eleven. And I'm in this intersection all the time, 2 or 3 times a day. And when they talk about traffic as well, they also don't consider when people come, stop off at their house really quickly, and then go out again, and then come back in. Because I can't tell you how many times I have to just drop something off at my house and then run back out to do something. So I don't really think the whole, amounts that people are coming back in and out of their houses, or in this case, apartments, are very accurate based upon what people's lives really are. And yeah, so I guess I'll end it at that, but yeah, sorry. So thank you very much, and appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Daryl Dickhoot. I live at 4143 Glencastle Drive in the Woodlands subdivision. Thank you for allowing us a chance to speak. Appreciate that. I also wanted to thank the Planning Commission for hosting the walk-in talks on November 6th at 2 p.m. It was wonderful to have a chance to express our views and to allow members of the Planning Commission to see and experience these sites. And there was a wonderful handout that was sent out, and I hope that the Planning Commission got to receive a lot of the feedback. I just wanted to read a couple of points here. One, the objectives of the walk and talk: to gather input on whether the land use plan for this area is correct. If so, how? If not, what should the land use plan be? Are the boundaries of the neighborhood node zoning correct? In the southeast corner specifically, which is the area that we're talking about here, what are your thoughts on the existing and approved development for this corner? Are the uses and scale size of buildings appropriate? On the southwest corner and the northwest corner, which hasn't come up yet, but I imagine at some point it will, similar questions about how could those potential areas be used, and there are some special considerations on the northwest corner. Once again, just seeking some input from the residents, which I thought was great. Also included in here were some pages from the master plan, Crooks and Wattles, and I just wanted to read just some snippets here. Crooks and Wattles. Development at this location should be low impact and provide a high benefit to the neighborhood using the least amount of land. In addition, there's another portion in here that says, when destinations are created, these nodes, referring to the neighborhood nodes, become a go-to place and take on a social role. In addition, there was another section in here related to the design concept, and I wanted to reference some of these. Design concept. The nodes provide uses and spaces that attract and welcome neighborhood residents. Site design attributes. Buildings should be separated from the right-of-way line by a landscaped green belt, one lane of off-street parking, or a pedestrian walk, or a combination of these. Other site design attributes. Off-street parking should be screened from the public right-of-way by a knee wall or low decorative fence with a hedge of plantings. Walks will connect adjacent developments and the public sidewalks. Flexible use of space allowing modest outdoor gathering spaces such as plazas will be encouraged. In addition, there was information in the packet of the survey that was done. There were 337 responses to the survey, and the question was asked, how do you think this node has been developed? 42% of the respondents said too dense and too intense. In addition, there was another survey question. What type of a development do you think fits this node? Choose all that apply. Single-family residential. 53% requested single-family residential. The second one was multifamily residential, townhomes, apartments, condominiums, 6.53%. So once again, the citizens were surveyed, and they responded 53% with single-family residential, 6.5% with multifamily residential. In addition, I just wanted to relay some comments that were given by representatives who attended the walk and talk on November 6th. The residents that were here asked that these statements be documented so that the Planning Commission could hear them. I don't know if that was done or not, but one of the comments was, I can't believe how busy this intersection is on a Saturday afternoon. This happened at 2 p.m. Another representative stated, I don't feel safe walking on the sidewalk. It's too close to traffic. One of the representatives also said, seems like the residents are requesting a reconsideration of the neighborhood node designation. The residents requested that these and other comments be documented and shared with the Planning Commission, as I mentioned before, hopefully it was. The residents were expecting that the Planning Commission would look at the neighborhood node designation before considering new development proposals. Hopefully the Planning Commission has received the feedback collected regarding from the neighborhood walks and talks, and hopefully this information is available for public review as well, and also that you would take this into consideration as you consider these projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, next person I'd like to talk to.
Good evening. My name is Tom Reese. I'm also in the Woodlands subdivision on Bradbury, 1400 Bradbury Drive. I agree with all of what has been said before. The one thing that, sitting here just listening to this, it seems to me that we're trying to jam a basketball into a keyhole here. And that's not surprising. A developer's trying to get the most money he possibly can squeeze out of a piece of property. But I think my point here is that it's not suitable for this area. This is a upscale residential area. If you look at the subdivision right across Crooks Road from the hill development there next to the park, you'll see that houses that are worth over $500,000 up. You go into Woodlands, it's the same thing. This is a upscale neighborhood. By the looks of the people here, you know, we're multicultural. It's a very desirable place. It has good schools, and we don't need the transient of jamming people into apartment houses and multifamily habitations where, you know, we have more traffic, more transiency, more noise, more crime, all of those things. Perhaps the city attorney can answer me, has Section 506A been amended in the last 15 months?
I'm not here to answer questions, sir.
Yeah.
Pardon?
We'll ask her.
Okay,
that.
well, if it hasn't, I just got wind of this thing a couple days ago. I had a funeral yesterday, and I couldn't, you know, do the homework that you folks have done. But on a prior one, I have noticed that this node plays no role in enhancing the quality of life and the continued viability of the city of Troy. It diminishes it, in our opinion. It does not at all respect the adjacent neighborhoods. One of you asked, well, have you asked the neighbors? Well, I'm sure the neighbors that are next to this are hoping that they can sell out and it becomes phase 3. But that does nothing for the people that have these expensive homes in this area and these subdivisions that have to put up with the traffic and so forth. Their property value gets diminished and the city changes. It will visually overpower the residential areas. You know, when I first moved here, and I've been here 38 years in Troy, 24 near this intersection, and, you know, it was much like the intersection at Coolidge and Waddles, or at Adams and Waddles, or going the other way, you know. And I live, you know, I go by here, and the lady mentioned making left turns out of the, you know, 7-Eleven. Either way, you're crossing through turning traffic as well as oncoming traffic. And I can see that's why the traffic people pushed the driveway back further, but they still will be crossing through oncoming and, you know, turning traffic to get out of there. Even in the middle of the day, when the buses go to the school, you can have 12 school buses down there, and it backs it all the way up to the Greek church. And when they pulled the driveway back, they essentially filled in part of what was a stream. In that area where it was a ravine, you know, they're going to put retaining walls, and all of a sudden, little by little, it becomes a drainage ditch, basically, instead of a stream. And the beauty of it is gone. And just looking at these plans, it's all cement. It's parking lot mostly, and you know, I think he has to really push to get 20% of greenery. I don't see it just looking at those diagrams. I'm sure you don't either. But I'm not sure that it really fulfills even the intent of the node. And I agree that the node needs to be revised. It changes the character of what is a very pleasant place, and I would hope that you would keep it that way. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
I didn't sign in, so do I need to do that now? Can I do it
Sure,
after
you can
I
do it
talk?
now, yeah.
Okay. Okay. My name is Michelle Kleiman. I live at 1157 Provincial Drive in Troy, so I live on the southwest corner, so I am, you know, right there in the rough of all this. So a couple things that I just want to, I listened to everything, so I've kind of changed what I wanted to say because a lot of things were talked about, but what I want to emphasize for what's been talked about today is traffic. And I know we've all talked about that, but I think that we really have, when we do these time studies, I think you have to look at, yes, there's an hour, you can look at an hour time, but if you really think about it, you have to take that high school into consideration, okay? As a parent, And as just most of us are, some of us are not, but as whatever, I have 3 children. I know that traffic is really about 20 minutes. Okay, it's like 6:50 to about 7:10 when you have kids, parents, teachers going into that area. Okay, so that's in the morning. In the afternoon, you also have to remember there's dismissal time for that. That 7-Eleven is a very big attraction to high school students, whether you want to believe it or not, it is. So when we talked about traffic and them all going in different directions, some are, but that's a very big focal point. And so I want you to take that into consideration, just as safety goes and accidents. I don't know statistics about talking about crashes, or I can't speak how to analyze them, but I can just say you're putting them at risk. Okay, again, that being an avenue for those apartments, 7-Eleven, that's really not a good idea. If you ever go in, how many of you have really gone in and out of that 7-Eleven? I have. Multiple times, okay? I always tell my kids, don't turn to the left on Waddles. Go the other way where you have to turn right. Okay, go around. So I know it's not a safe intersection. I go there a lot. So I really think just the heart of you has to get into that and realize it's safe. It's not really a safe avenue. The other thing I'd like to say is I did attend the neighborhood node, and my recollection of the southeast corner, very little discussion, if any. It was, this has already been decided on, we're going to talk about the other 3 corners, okay? So it was never, in my knowledge, and I was there, did I hear it, and maybe I missed it, that it was always those existing apartments were decided upon. There was nothing about these 60 more that were going up. And that was just November 7th, okay? So the other thing that I'm a little alarmed about is we put down our names, we put down our emails at that neighborhood node. So I've never gotten any feedback back from that saying, hey, the plans have changed, or what the feedback was. Did the planning commission get our notes? I don't know what happened with that neighborhood note other than we attended. And now I'm finding that the plan was different from what was on November 7th. Now we're talking about 60 more, okay? The other thing I'd like to say is I think I've heard a lot of talk, but the one thing I didn't think was addressed is in 1 square mile, okay, if you're talking, you're going from Waddles now to Big Beaver, and you're going from Crooks to Livernois. Think about what's gone up, okay? We have 2 hotels that have gone up. We have that big, huge apartment building that's going up where, by, what's behind there? You know what I'm talking about, the big one off by where they did that little town center where they have Yard House and those restaurants there. So I don't even know how many apartments those are, but are we accounting for those apartments and people living there when we're doing these time studies? Where's that traffic going to go? Some of that traffic is going to go onto Crooks Road to Waddles, okay? Some of those people are going to have kids. Some of these people in these new apartments are going to have kids. Are we able to accommodate even our schools at that level? So I think there's a lot of things that we need to be accommodating and thinking about in this. The last thing I want to say is I moved to Detroit to be in a neighborhood. I didn't move to Troy to be in a city. I didn't move to Birmingham. I didn't move to downtown Rochester. I moved to Troy. So just 3/4 from where I live, you're at 16 and Crooks. That's a huge, there's everything you want there, okay? There's apartments, there's restaurants, there's this. Why are we moving it even farther into the neighborhoods? Why aren't we keeping the neighborhoods neighborhoods? We have an area for apartments already. We don't need more at that corner. That's my 2 cents, and I hope everybody kind of looks at it from a residential perspective, because that's why we moved to Troy, to be in a residential environment. We have cities like Birmingham, we have cities like Rochester if we wanted more of a city life. And most of us at that neighborhood node, I don't think anybody wanted any of this to happen. So please consider the residents. I appreciate you bringing that up because I know you asked if the residents were considered. So thank you for your time, I appreciate it.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to address the Planning Commission? Seeing none, we will bring it back to the commission for any further discussion or comments. Mr. Hudson.
I want to talk about traffic again. I've been on this commission for a long time, and each year I've been a member of this commission. We've had more developments coming through, and that word traffic starts to surface again. As a matter of fact, I think probably the acme, a pivot point for me, was when there was to be a large development on Alpine, and a young lady by the name of Paracas was very vocal opposition to that, spoke very eloquently. And it seems like with each development, we get a little more concerned about it. And I'm very familiar with that intersection of Waddles and Crooks. I travel that 5 or 6 times a week, usually in the morning, sometimes later in the afternoon. And every year, that traffic has become more difficult and very, very difficult. Now we're talking about 162 new units being developed on the southeast corner. And if, as planners, we don't live in the darkness, we're recognizing that there is still in litigation a huge development started about 3 years ago, which Planning Commission turned down and City Council turned down. That's still being litigated with a whole bunch of apartments in there and problems with the layout. And lest we forget that the northwest corner is still vacant. No matter what happens with that litigation, whether it's successful or not, that land is going to have multi-family in it, adding more units to the traffic. And then right across the street, we've got the southwest corner, which is vacant right now. 5 years, that'll be multifamily, almost guarantee it, or a request for that. It keeps going. And we talk about this node being with a village. Village consists so far of a 7-Eleven and a dentist office, surrounded by some vacant lots and a lot of apartment units and condos. That's not a village. That's not what we intended in the master plan. Now, I recognize the master plan is not law. It's a wish list for us. But we made a mistake on that, and it should be residential. Maybe it's got a multifamily, but it certainly can be a little better laid out with more open space, more amenities, and consideration of the neighbors. I guess maybe to sum up, I have not yet heard or read in a traffic report submitted to this planning commission on a development, any traffic report which has said, no, we can't handle the traffic with a new development, shouldn't do it. It's getting to the point where if there's a category F, we should probably be looking at that as what's coming. So that's just some of my concerns about this whole development. Other commissioners have talked on other aspects of this development, good points that apparently shouldn't be. So I've said my piece.
Okay. Mr. Faison.
I'll echo Mr. Hudson's comments. I'm concerned about the traffic as well. I was able to walk the node that afternoon, so the traffic was quite heavy, heavier than I anticipated. I also have been in the 7-Eleven in the parking lot, and I know it's currently very tight. And I, like Ms. Parakis, I did not realize that that was going to be an ingress and egress point. And when I look at the site plan review design standards, and I see the third one say enhance the character, environment, and safety for pedestrians and motorists, I don't see this project doing that at all. There's other aspects of it too. I'd like to see additional uses and things like that, but my primary issue is the traffic and the volume of traffic.
Anyone else? Mr. Kren, go ahead.
Sure. This one's for the staff to look at. If you could bring up the image of the West Hills development part. The plan view.
Bear with me.
No, take your time. There's no rush. Okay, thanks.
That one?
That's it, yeah, that's it, that's good, good enough. So, looking at that, and looking at their, the summation under, this was page 6 of Carlisle's, Wortman's report, and under the column of minimum open space, it says you need 20%, provided unknown, compliance, need to confirm. Now, I'm looking at that for open space. So I guess my question to staff is, okay, what's open space? Is it the street? Is it the parking spaces? Is it just the green, the little thin bands of greenery? Is it the, it's certainly not the buildings. I can't see 20% of that image being open space that is not pavement or building. It just doesn't, you know, a quarter of that should be, or 20%, but not quite a quarter, should be open space. I don't see, and again, they don't provide numbers. It says unknown. So how do we vote on something if it's unknown? It just, you know, just looking at it, I don't see 20% of space that's like open for, you know, greenery. It just, of course, this is not a good picture because it doesn't show greenery at all, but I'm a bit confused how it can comply. Well, it says in the report it doesn't, we don't know, it's unknown, so it can't comply, but I can't vote on something without having knowns in writing. I mean, you know, people talking is one thing, but I want to see a document that shows how they calculated that open space, because I don't see it. I don't see 20% of that West Hills being open space other than parking and streets. That's my comment.
Does Mr. Sevedin or Mr. Carlisle have a response to that, or?
Well, so when we talk about open space, the first thing we do when we have a zoning ordinance provision is we look at the definition. So I'm just going to read the definition of open space. A parcel or area of land that's intended to provide light and air that is designed for resource protection, aesthetic, or recreational purposes. Open space uses may include, but are not limited to, lawn, decorative plantings, walkways, active and passive recreation area, land use buffers, playgrounds, fountains, woodlands, wetlands, and bioretention facilities. Open space shall not include streets, driveways, parking lots, or other surfaces designed or intended for vehicular traffic.
Great.
So my question, you raised the question that I raised, which is confirm that number with regards to the percentage. I also want to note that there's a landscape requirement too, which is 20%. That does not include areas of walkways, et cetera. So it's a little bit higher threshold for landscape. So I had the same question as well, as do they comply with the landscape requirements as well in terms of a percentage-wise?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Sevedin.
I'd like to address the conversation or the question that Ms. Parakis had earlier related to EVA and cross-access. So I left the meeting. I tried to, what I didn't want to do was people leave the meeting because there was a question raised at a public meeting. I didn't want to wait till the next meeting. I wanted to kind of try to do my best to answer the question. So I looked at so in May, this is going, after an application receives preliminary site plan approval from the Planning Commission, which this did, it goes, they submit engineering drawing, detailed engineer drawings to the engineering department. It's called final approval. And that was ongoing during the summer. So I'm going to read you some emails really quickly. It's not going to take a lot of time, but the point of this is not to throw anyone under the bus. In fact, it's the opposite. It's to just kind of demonstrate the fact that these type of decisions aren't made in a vacuum. They're made with interaction with other departments who know a lot more about these types of things than I do. So on May 12th, Eric from Fire sent an email to Antonio in engineering and copied Julie with the city attorney. And Eric said to Antonio, I have a number of issues with using Berry Lane as an EVA. It's a private drive. If this is established and the current owners of Berry Lane decide they like to put up a gate at Crooks or park cars along the stretch of Berry Lane or discontinue regular maintenance of the surface, what recourse does the city have? Will the city have to endure years of litigation only to get screwed? his words, not mine. I don't see any good coming out of the use of a private road for an EVA. Also, a gravel road is not an ideal surface for $1 million apparatus. It would have to be a paved surface. Have they considered going through the 7-Eleven parking lot? There was a response to that the next day, May 13th, from Antonio in engineering. Other engineers and myself were copied on this exchange. Eric, this is again to fire. We're going to present the developer two options. One, pave Berry Lane with asphalt pavement. And two, use 7-Eleven as an EVA and remove the drive access on Berry Lane, see attached route. This is assuming the grading and geometrics are acceptable. That triggered a memory for me. When Westington 1 went before the Planning Commission, instead of a vehicular cross-access, there was a pedestrian path cross-access because there was some pretty significant grade there. So, and I confirmed that with Greg Bono, the project engineer for Westington 1. He's here if you have any questions for him. But there was some further back and forth. This is from Eric and fire to Antonio. Again, I was copied on this as well as other engineers. Again, not throwing anyone under the bus, it's just to explain, like, there's a lot of moving parts here. So Antonio, we're against using Berry Lane altogether. I like the 7-Eleven concept. So if they can get a permanent cross-access easement, we'll accept it. Well, there was a permanent cross-access easement in place already at 7-Eleven. Finally, there was more. There was an exchange between Julie and Eric, and I was copied on that. So Julie told Eric, the gravel road must be paved to accommodate the fire trucks. I do not believe it's in the city's best interest to enter into an agreement with the private owners of the road regarding no parking. It would be an enforcement nightmare if left to the owners of the road. So that was intended just to kind of show you that the back and forth and the thinking that went into the eliminating of Berry Lane and opening up the cross-access. The email described it as an EVA, but it's a cross-access. And I'm glad that Steve Deering here is from OHM because, and I understand the concerns about the potential for people from the apartments going to 7-Eleven and then to turn on the Waddles. But I look at it a little bit differently. I am not an expert. Steve Deering is, and if he wants to address this, fine. But I look at it as now, if you take Westington out of the equation, 7-Eleven's down here. So traffic, if you're at 7-Eleven, you are forced to turn left or turn right onto Crooks. With the traffic backups here on Crooks, turning left can be very difficult at times. So what it allows 7-Eleven customers to do is to go out here, and because the queuing is further back, they're able to turn left and make that movement. So it actually helps with the ability to leave the site by opening up that cross-access and providing options for the 7-Eleven customers leaving that site. So that was the kind of the thinking that went into it, and your question of why wasn't this brought up presented to the Planning Commission, because at the time it was a pedestrian connection and it was indicated that there was grade issues. No more, no less than that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Brent. It does clarify. It does make me feel a little bit better. I still don't know that it's appropriate that leap be made outside the purview of the Planning Commission. I don't know that. I guess I will be not as naive next time when we're dealing with these accesses, because we really have to assume that they're going to be used. And I just can't imagine approving 102 apartments. I get what you're saying, that maybe 7-Eleven people will go onto Waddles, but if you're trying to head south on Crooks and you're coming out of there, you're not going to go turn left on Waddles to wait at a light to go left on Crooks. You're going to cut through. You're going to make a left on Crooks. And I can tell you, I mean, everyone's given their experiences. I counted. I went Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I counted. I average going through that intersection between 12 and 20 times a day. I do have 5 kids, so I make a lot of runs, but I use that intersection at many times, and I can tell you there are times that I'm in that left turn lane heading north on Crooks, trying to take a left on Waddles to go to the schools, and there are 3 cars waiting at that light, and then there's a car turned inverted the other way with other cars trying to wait at that light because that car is waiting to get into 7-Eleven, and then at the same time, cars at 7-Eleven trying to come out. It's a disaster already. So I have a lot of concerns about that. To be fair, though, I think that I was going to just suggest that we put up there was a list, I think, Mr. Carlisle, that you had prepared for us to go through of issues. We might want to just knock them out. I mean, most of them I think we've all talked about, but.
Yeah, I mean, Ms. Practice, I did give you a list, but there are other issues that obviously came up as part of the discussion tonight, too, so.
Right, correct.
A reflective list of everything that was discussed.
I just think that we didn't even talk about everything you even had. You know, in the report, it did say that they didn't comply with the bicycles. So that would have been another thing to add on there. But, I mean, I'm ready to do a resolution, unless anybody else has any discussion.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I've never done a resolution before. So I just read it?
Sure.
Preliminary site plan review, SP JPLN 2021-016. Proposed, the Westington 2, south of Waddles, east of Crooks, parentheses 870 Bearland Drive, pin 882021101009, section 21, currently zoned neighborhood node, I district. Resolution number PC 2022-01. Resolved that preliminary site plan approval pursuant to Article 8 of the zoning ordinance as requested for the proposed the Westington 2 30-unit apartment development south of Waddles, east of Crooks, section 21, currently zoned neighborhood node I district, be denied for the following reasons. The orientation of the buildings violate the zoning ordinance. The Planning Commission does not approve the tree mitigation requirements. The open space fails the zoning ordinance calculations. The site design standards fail to promote the public health, safety, and welfare, primarily due to traffic issues. And the traffic study, well, that doesn't need to go in the resolution. Is there anything else anyone wants to add?
Should this be for both projects or just?
One at a time, because we're not combining them.
So then I'm not sure the orientation is an issue for
Oh,
this.
sorry. You're right. Mrs. Zarnecki, are you able to take away my comment about the orientation?
It hasn't been seconded yet, so.
Okay.
you can take it. Yep.
Okay, yes, I forgot that, you're right. Good point, because we're not combining. Is there anything else?
I just want to maybe double check. Did we talk about the intensity? Because this is a type B.
Yeah, you're right. It also fails to meet the transition requirements of the zoning ordinance as well as the density requirements.
So that, you know, at least the applicant can understand that they have to kind of thin it out and make it less dense. Otherwise, it will be same discussion again.
Right, anything else you want to add into the resolution? If so, is there a second to the motion? Ms. Malalahala has seconded it. Any discussion on the motion? I just wanted to add my main concern. There's some aspects of the project I like, but my main concern with this part is, number one, is the destruction of the trees on the site, and the fact that I don't believe there's enough of a transition going from the higher height buildings that are closer to the street as opposed to where it comes up to the residential areas farther to the east and to the south. So that's why I'm voting yes on the resolution. Any other discussion items? Seeing none, I believe we're ready for the roll call.
Mr. Lambert,
Yes.
Ms. Malala Holly,
Yes.
Ms. Parekis?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Motion carries.
All right, we are on to Hills West preliminary. And once I read what this is here for the audience and for those who are here, this is a preliminary site plan review for the proposed Hills West, east side of Crooks, south of Waddles, 3902 Crooks, 88-20-21-101-003, Section 21, currently zoned NN Neighborhood Node I District. I guess I'll turn it back at this point to Mr. Carlisle or to Mr. Savidant to see how you want to address this one, since we covered most of the information in the previous resolution.
I think there are two separate projects. They should stand on their two separate merits with regards to resolution. So even if there are issues that were part of the first resolution, if there's similar issues in the second resolution, you should include those as well. On the other hand, if there's a resolution of support to approve it, you should rationale the reasons as to why you support the project. So they should stand on their own.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the members of the commission, or are you ready to entertain a motion at this time?
I believe we did make the change about the entrance to the phase 2, but for the Hills West, it stands, that particular bullet point, I would say. Okay, just wanted to make the clarification, yeah.
So do you want me to make the?
Sure, go ahead.
Did I do that right, that I had to read all that stuff like that?
Yes.
Okay. So preliminary site plan review, SP JPLN 2021-017, proposed Hills West, east side of Crooks, south of Waddles, 3902 Crooks, 88-20-21-101-003, Section 21, currently zoned Neighborhood Node I District. Resolution number PC-2022-01. Resolved that preliminary site plan approval pursuant to Article 8 of the zoning ordinance as requested for the proposed Hills West 30-unit apartment development, east side of Crooks, south of Waddles, Section 21, currently zoned Neighborhood Node I District, be denied for the following reasons. Are we able to have Ms. Zarnicki read back and then just add the, can I have you read back what we already said, and then I'm just going to add the orientation of the building?
I can just add it myself with all the rest.
Okay.
One other addition I'd
Okay.
like to talk about. We were not provided with the minimum open space. They have no calculation, so.
That was in there.
That was in there?
Yes, I said that they didn't meet the requirements for open space.
It did, yes.
It was in there.
Okay.
It was
All right,
included.
Good.
Any other points that need to be added into the resolution? Seeing none, is there a second to the motion? Mr. Rahman seconds it. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we're ready for the roll call.
Ms. Malala-Holly?
Yes.
Was that a yes, Ms. Malala?
Yes,
Thank you. Ms. Parekis?
Yes.
Mr. Rahman?
Yes.
Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Was that a yes, Mr. Tagle?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Faison?
Yes.
Mr. Hudson?
Yes.
Mr. Krant?
Yes.
Mr. Lambert?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Motion passes. Okay. On to other items on the agenda. Public comments for items on the agenda. Are there anyone from the public that wishes to speak for items that were on the actual agenda tonight? Seeing none, we will go on to Planning Commission comment. And so I'll put Mr. Tagle on the spot, and we'll go this way and that way around, so any comments?
I'm good tonight, thanks.
Okay.
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay.
First of all, I want to thank Brent for leaving the meeting and checking on that issue for me. I really appreciate that. It did help to clarify, so I understood the process of how we got there. So I don't agree with the result, but I do appreciate knowing how we got there. There was something else. What was it? Oh, I know. I just wanted to say that we have developers who've been coming in here for the last couple of years, from before the time I was on the Planning Commission, coming in and telling us that they meet the requirements. And I don't really appreciate that because they have to understand, like, first of all, there were so many requirements that weren't met, but they have to understand that we are a body who looks at the zoning ordinance and applies the zoning ordinance. And more importantly, when developers come in and talk to us about reducing density as not being feasible, you know, we have to remember that it's not our job to overlook the zoning ordinance to make a developer's job feasible. It's the developer's job to bring projects that are feasible and economical for them. So, you know, we're going to apply the zoning ordinance correctly and accurately, and if it's not feasible, then they've got to make their project feasible, but it's not, I don't think that we should feel pressure ever to, you know, support something that just for an economic reason for a developer.
Grant?
I just want to thank the residents for coming in tonight. I think your points were very well thought out and appreciated by this commission, so thank you for coming in.
Mr. Faison?
Nothing from me.
Hudson?
Nothing for me.
Ms. Mahaly?
Yeah, thank you. Just a quick clarification from Mr. Savidant and Mr. Carlisle regarding open space requirements. It does say, and I'm aware of the fact that it's 20%, but does it vary between a condominium complex, townhome complex to an apartment complex in terms of how this open space is actually used or provided, I would say?
No, it's a straight calculation based on, like I read the definition. It doesn't contemplate the usability of said open space. It's really a, I mean, I think part of the review of the planning commission is to determine if the open space is functional and would well serve the development. But in terms of that 20% calculation, it doesn't contemplate the use of that open space. It's a straight calculation.
Okay, got it. And definitely under open space, we are talking about like a plaza, play structure. Are we talking about all those common use places too?
Yes, those
Right.
count under the definition of open space.
Okay.
But we have two calculations. We have landscape space, which is literally green space, and then open space, which could include elements that aren't green.
Correct. Okay, got it. Thank you.
Anyone from staff have any comments? Seeing none? Oh, go ahead, Mr. Carlisle.
Real quickly. Sorry, Brent. I don't want the planning commission to think we have dropped the master plan or we're not moving on it. We are trying to schedule a meeting with the city council to do a similar neighborhood tour of them to get their opinion. And then once we have that, we want to come back to the planning commission and schedule a joint meeting between the planning commission and the city council to discuss issues and then move forward with that. So it's been delayed a little bit just because of scheduling issues with the holidays and stuff, but we're ramping and rolling and moving quickly on this.
Plus you have to line up buses for the city council, which we didn't get, so.
Run for council.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to know that, you know, these kind of proposals are coming, and I know that we are having something in our mind that we have to make some change to the nodes. And maybe this question is for our attorney, that is there any way we can withhold or delay or some kind of moratorium, or no? It has to come and it has to be, you know, we have to make a decision.
We may not make any changes. I mean, we don't know, so we can't put a
So-
moratorium.
Okay, so it will just come and then we'll have to make a decision based on the way we want to see, or based on the master plan. If it doesn't comply, that will be a denied case. Okay, no, I got it. So, thank you.
Okay, seeing nothing else, we are adjourned.